Members, Candace and Sam, good to see you again. First item on the agenda is approval of minutes of May 9, 2023. It's moved in second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Contrary minded, motion carried. First item is the PLN 23-004, Carl Angel, redesignation and rezoning, first reading report, and it's being handled by Rachel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the subject property is located at 25 Burgess Road in Shubenacadie. The zoning on the property is rural use, and you can see on the zoning map here, the rural use is this grey colour. We have a small area of moderate risk floodplain, which is an overlay zone, and then this blue-green colour is high risk floodplain. Within the subject property, there is also another property. You can see outlined in red here. And this purple line shows the growth management area for Shubenacadie, and it runs alongside the edge of the property. So there is an existing 2-unit residential building on the property right now, and it was constructed in 2019. And despite being outside the growth management area, this building has municipal pipe services, which is due to historical servicing of a dwelling on the property. I should also note that this dwelling here is also serviced with municipal water and wastewater. The application property has approximately 47 metres of frontage on Burgess Road, which includes this stretch here, if you can see my pointer, and this stretch here. Along the northern part of the property, an easement is provided for access to, there's a couple of properties, which includes this built property here, and then the property that's adjacent to it. The applicant wants to construct an additional 2-unit residential building, and the applicant plans to subdivide his property to create an additional lot, which would enable another 2-unit residential building. The rural use zone permits 2-unit residential. However, the frontage for an RU lot is 30 metres minimum, and the frontage requirements for a serviced R2 lot is 18 metres. So as we have a frontage of 47 metres, this doesn't give enough room to subdivide again. So the applicant needs to rezone to R2 to enable the subdivision to occur. And also the property needs to be serviced by municipal water and wastewater to allow for that smaller 18-metre frontage. This would mean an amendment to the boundary of the Shubenacadie Growth Management Area to include the application property. And you can see in the bottom right corner, this concept elevation was provided by the applicant to show this is kind of the design that he was anticipating for the property, and I understand it's very similar to the existing 2-unit building that he has on the property right now. The application proposes amendments to the municipal plan and strategy and the land use bylaw, so those would be redesignation and redesignation for rural use to establish residential neighbourhood, and a rezoning from rural use to 2-dwelling unit residential, and then amendments to the boundary of the growth management area, which will include the application property. And you can see here on the right of the presentation slide, there is a drawing that the applicant submitted. He did initially propose an additional single unit, but the proposed zoning wouldn't enable that. So he has changed his plans and now wants to build an additional 2-unit dwelling, which would mean one property here has 2 units, and then another property here would have an additional 2-unit building. The growth management area for Shubenacadie is the area where municipal water and wastewater services are available, and the pipes for those services extend outside the growth management area along Burgess Road and across the frontage of the application property. Policy GM13 of the Municipal Plan and Strategy indicates that council shall establish the growth management area as a serviceable boundary for the community of Shubenacadie, where municipal water and wastewater services are available. And as noted already, municipal pipe services are already provided to the property right now. So until the wastewater treatment facility is operational, there is no capacity to service any additional units on the property. It's anticipated that the treatment facility will not be operational until early 2024. Policies relating to the expansion of the growth management area and also general policies relating to amendments to the municipal plan and strategy ask whether the amendments are in the overall best interest of the municipality. and staff will provide an analysis relating to these policies and all other relevant policies in the final staff report. There is a specific policy, which is policy GM27 of the municipal plan and strategy, that relates to the expansion of the growth management area. And just a note there to say that council's decision on this application is not appealable to Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board. An advertisement outlining the proposal has actually been placed in the Chronicle Herald today. As part of the review process for the amendments, a public information meeting is required, and that was held on June the 6th. There was one member of the public and 3 councillors in attendance. There were no questions or comments regarding this application. Following first reading, questionnaires will be mailed to owners of property within 300 metres of the application site. And you can see on the flow diagram here, we're at the first reading stage. If first reading is given, then questionnaires will be sent to people within 300 metres of the site, comments requested from internal departments and external agencies, and then a final report will be provided to PAC before a public hearing. So the recommendation is that first reading be given to the amendments and that authorisation be given to schedule a public hearing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Rachel. Councillor Green.
I'll move the recommended motion.
It's moved. Second by Councillor Musa. Any comments from anybody? Question being called, we'll go to the vote. And the motion is passed unanimously. Thank you, Rachel. What are you doing? Thank you. Second item on the agenda is the PLN 23-001, Andrew Kim, Development Agreement, Mixed Use Building, initial report. And back to you, Rachel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the property is located at 251 Highway 214 in Elmsdale. There is an existing building located on the property, and this is due to be removed. And this is the building here. And we can see from the aerial photography that this is the subject site. This is the McDonald's property. And across the street, there is the Irving Oil property, which has a Circle K gas station and an A&W restaurant and drive-through. The property is zoned Village Core. The McDonald's property is zoned Regional Commercial. And then the property opposite, which is the Irving property, is also zoned Village Core. There is an existing residential building on the property to the south of the site. So the proposal is for a multi-unit commercial building. There'll be 2 uses in the building. One will be the dental clinic, which is proposed for the rear of the building. Dr. Kim owns and operates the existing Elmsdale Dental Clinic in the Sobeys Mall, so the plan is to relocate to this building. And then a drive-through coffee shop is proposed for the front. The proposed building is mostly single-story, but there is a second floor for the dental office. And you can see here, this is the second floor, if you can see my pointer on the screen there. And this will provide a meeting room and a kitchen, staff room, and then there's an outdoor patio on the back. This part of the building here, although it is higher than the rest of the building, this is this one story with a high ceiling inside. So the plan is on the screen there. And I can just explain what's on the plan here. We have an easement on the property, which is this line here is for a water main easement, if you can follow the pointer. And the drive-through driveway is located over that easement. We have the entrance here, the driveway entrance. If you're accessing the drive-through, you would come around the back of the building and enter the drive-through here. This is the window that you pick up your order. And there is also a proposal for an active transportation trail along the edge of the property, you can see just here. And then there will be a retaining wall with fencing above that retaining wall. So the proposed plan is being presented following many discussions with municipal staff and the developer. The discussions were regarding the drive-through driveway being constructed over the water main easement and the inclusion of an AT trail and easement along the southern edge of the property. So staff worked extensively with the developer to line up these requirements. The municipal engineer have reviewed the plans to put the drive-through over the water main, and that water main was installed in 2018. And staff have considered the significant community benefit from linking the AT network over this property. And in balancing the two issues, staff consider that the benefit from the active transportation linkage outweighs the future potential impact to the water main transmission. The final design of the sites will be included in the development agreements. So the proposal also includes elements which do not meet the as-of-right requirements of the land use bylaw, and staff will provide a full review of the design of the proposed developments in the final staff report. So there are 3 elements here. There are the parking spaces to the front. There are 2 spaces, I'll just bring it up here on the plan. So these 2 spaces here are located further forward in the front of the building. The The applicant is proposing internally illuminated ground sign with a height the same as the McDonald's property, and then a black chain link fence currently proposed above the retaining wall for the safety of AT trail users. And with this development agreement application, council can decide to negotiate and vary elements of the land use bylaw, as there are policies in the municipal plan and strategy to enable this. And this has been done on many other development agreement applications. The Planning and Development Department will review the proposed application based on policies in the MPS and a detailed table of the criteria from the policies and corresponding comments from staff and reviewing agencies will be attached to the final report. So this is just the initial report. So all those comments will come in the next report. Staff will be requesting comments from internal departments and external agencies, which includes Nova Scotia Department of Public Works and East Hants Department of Infrastructure and Operations, and staff from Parks, Rec and Culture. Both of these departments have been very actively involved in discussing this application. And also the Nova Scotia Department of Public Works have been in discussion with the applicant on the development of their site plan, including the location of the driveway onto Highway 214. But I'll still seek comments in writing. Planning staff will comply with policies regarding citizen engagement. An advertisement outlining the proposal and indicating that is under review by staff will be placed in the Chronicle Herald. A letter and questionnaire will be mailed to all property owners within 300 metres of the subject property, and a public information meeting is not required for this application. So this initial report outlines the development proposal. A further report will consider traffic and other planning matters. Staff are recommending that a public hearing be scheduled for the application, and then any decisions to approve or not the application is appealable to the Utility and Review Board. So we're at the very early stages of the processing. Questionnaires will be sent to property owners within 300 metres, comments requested from departments, internal and external, and then a final staff report will be provided to PAC before a public hearing. And the recommendation is that initial consideration be given and authorise staff to schedule a public hearing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Rachel. Deputy Warden Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to staff. Did I hear chain link fence?
Yes. Yes, so I'll just show you on the plan here.
But isn't a chain link fence not permittable in that zone?
It's not permitted if it was an as-of-right development. Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair. So this is a development agreement, and in the municipal planning strategy, development agreements for institutional uses, which this building is, a good chunk of it is in institutional use, you can negotiate the terms of those things under the as-of-right requirements. So based on that, PAC and council can vary that requirement for a chain link fence. So we did have some discussions internally regarding the fence. And just to say as well that Those details aren't finalized. That's what's being requested at this point.
Okay.
We're still having those discussions, but we have had some discussions internally about what some of our concerns regarding some of the fencing that is permitted as of right. So we can provide a further analysis in the next staff report once we've had more discussions.
Because I would like to know, like, one of the things for the next staff report through you, Mr. Chair, staff, is that retaining wall the drop in height? Like, what is going to be the height from the top of that to the bottom? Because that will definitely influence my thinking of the rigidity and what needs to be there to stop people from possibly falling through or falling off of. So, thank you. That's all I have.
Mr. Chair, can I just
Go
quickly
ahead,
respond to that, just for your information at this point? So the most of the drop-off is around the back of the property. You can see here, it's not quite clear, but the elevation change isn't significant towards the front. It mostly changes once you get around the back here. So it does vary quite significantly from the front to the back of the property, but we can provide that in the next staff report.
Thank you, Deputy Warden. Councillor Rhino.
To staff, with regard to the easement, that's currently a water line that's running through there now.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct, yes.
So if there was a break or anything, we would have to go in and interrupt that business.
That's correct. And actually, through you, Mr. Chair, the applicant's aware of those risks. And there will be some, we have had those discussions with the applicant, so they're fully aware that there is a potential risk there. But this is a fairly new water main, so I don't know, I don't know if Jesse wants to speak to that particular issue, but.
Thank you. Through Mr. Chair, the water main in that location is a transmission main. It was installed as part of the Lance Transmission Main Project, 2016-2017. From a infrastructure stance, the ideal situation is to not have anything around your transmission mains. That said, is if there was work to be done on the area, our technical team did look at it and reviewed how would we service that area, and we're confident that we can get through and do necessary work with trench box and dragging protocol that we do have to use in other locations, so it's not unprecedented. So it is something that can be done, and we talked about, the service disruption, and we cannot guarantee continued access for this business for that section across the easement, and that's what will have to go into any agreement, just because that's something that you can't schedule things sometimes in the water industry. It is what it is, and we'd have to go in and shut them down for a period of time if that were the case. But I wouldn't anticipate it for a significant amount of time based on that, how new that asset is.
All right, that's still my concern. I just don't like this, the way it's set up. We're going into a business, we're gonna asphalt it over. To me, I'm just not in favor of it. And the second thing I'm very concerned about is we're gonna add to the traffic on that 214. You've got McDonald's, which is hard to get in and out of. You've got the A&W and Irvin right across the road. Now we're gonna put another business, now that we could allow another business to go in there, which will compound that traffic severely, with a coffee shop no less, that's gonna add to that early morning run. And the way the 214 set up, it's just, I don't think it's ideal whatsoever. And I'm having reservations about this one. Thank you.
Is that all, Councillor
Yeah.
Rhino? Thank you.
Respond to that, please?
Go ahead, Rachel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we will be consulting with Nova Scotia Public Works and get their feedback on the traffic, but they have had some extensive consultation, and that's part of that discussion was actually in terms of the location of this driveway. But we will have that discussion, we will get those comments, and we'll provide those back to Planning Advisory Committee.
I don't hear from Public Works. Because anybody should be able to drive up there and see how much of a problem this is gonna create, no matter where they put that driveway. There's just so much traffic on that 214, and now we're gonna add to that, so close to that intersection there. And it's just gonna compound that problem all over again, so, I don't need no, study from Public Works to tell me what it's gonna create, because one can see it. Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Tingley.
Through the chair, I just want to move the recommended motion to go through the next steps.
Moved in second. Questions being called. We'll go to the vote. And the motion is passed 12-1 with Counselor Reiner voting nay. Thank you, Rachel. The next item on the agenda is PLN 23-006, ELT Property Holdings Limited, MPS and LUB Mapping Amendment, request for a public hearing, public information meeting. Debbie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the applicant is ELT Property Holdings Limited. The property is located at 51 Old Horn Settlement Road, so the two properties here. There's a house currently on the smaller of the two properties, and then there's nothing on the larger of the two properties. The size of the property is 1.13 hectares, and the application is to amend the municipal planning strategy and land use bylaw by changing the generalized future land use designation from Village Core VC to Medium Density Residential Neighborhood MR, and to rezone the same from Village Core VC to Multiple Unit Residential R3 zone. The purpose of the application is to allow for the development of 3 24-unit multiplexes. The property owner currently has site plan approval on the subject lands that permits the development of 6 12-unit apartment buildings. Both of the approved and the proposed application would have a total of 72 dwelling units. If the municipal planning strategy and land use bylaw mapping application is approved, the applicant does not have to develop the site as shown on the concept plan. However, they are restricted by the size and frontage of the land and by the requirements of the land use bylaw. So under the regulations, a maximum of 3 lots could be created with a maximum of 24 dwelling units on each lot. However, the applicant could apply for a development agreement that would allow for not more dwelling units, but to change the building. So instead of doing 3 24-unit buildings, they could potentially do, on one of the lots, they could do 2 12-unit buildings or something to that effect. But that would only be done by development agreement. The applicant would also have to be compliant with other land use bylaw regulations, such as amenity space requirements, buffering, design requirements, and parking requirements. So this is the proposed concept plan, and under the mapping amendments, it would allow for 3, as I said, 24-unit apartment buildings. Each of those apartment buildings are proposed to be 3 stories. There would be a mixture of above ground and below ground parking, and the applicant has shown here that 2 of the property lines will be buffered with a treed buffer, and a portion of the third property line there would also be buffered with a treed buffer. Again, there would be a walkway down to the main road there, and what you see isn't necessarily what they have to do, but again, permitted a maximum of 72 dwelling units. So under the approved site plan approval, this is the site plan here that was approved. The site plan has more surface parking compared to the proposed R3 plan that utilizes underground parking, which then results in a higher lot coverage of hard surfaces. So each of these here, there's 6 buildings in total with 12 units in each building. I think it's 12 units. Yeah, and there's 0 lot line in between every unit, so it would look like this from the front. It looks like this from the front with an entrance to every side. And all of this here in the rear is covered is asphalt parking. So it basically extends all the way to the back of the property line. Staff will be requesting comments from internal departments and external agencies as part of the application process for the mapping amendments. Policy IM10 of the MPS is the policy that permits council to consider the proposed mapping amendments. East Council has to determine if the proposed application is in the best interest of the municipality. Citizen engagement, an advertisement outlining the application and indicating that it had been received and was under review by staff was placed in the Chronicle Herald. Public information meeting is required for all amendments to the municipal planning strategy. Unless directed otherwise, a letter indicating the time and date of the public information meeting will be mailed to all property owners within 300 meters of the subject properties, and additional advertising will be placed on the East Hants website and on our social media feeds. The recommendation is that Planning Advisory Committee recommends that council authorize staff to schedule a public information meeting. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Debbie. Councilor Garden Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. So this came before council when I was first on council, so I'm thinking a couple of years ago that this was approved.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, the site plan approval was done a few years ago now, so that's this one here, that's the approved site plan approval. And what happened is that the site plan was appealed by a neighboring resident and was brought forward to council for their review. And the development officer's decision to approve the site plan approval was upheld by council at that time.
Okay. I remember the person across the road sold their house. The people were unhappy about it bordering on these. And this is what you get when you're putting in these developments next to individual homes and single dwelling units. So here we are again with the same development that already got approved and hasn't been built, and now they're requesting more, requesting another story, requesting another development agreement to add to what's already been approved. And I just think that we have to, I don't know I would like anybody who's driven down or can drive down through Enfield right now and see what we've got going on. We've got apartment buildings being built on Catherine White's property next to the Magnolia. We've got a 4-story apartment building that's coming that's assisted living on the Magnolia property. We've got 3 apartment buildings being built across from the RCMP station. We've got all those lots that are by the tavern included, and the other lots all have development agreements or are in the process. They're all going to be apartment buildings. We have to stop taking away the security of the people who are living in Enfield. It doesn't matter what their zoning is now, it's what council is going to turn it into. You know, it may be village core, it may be R2, but people who are living there in homes, they have no idea what it's going to be next year, because what it is and what council is going to agree to turn it into are 2 totally different things. These neighbors are now accepted the fact that they're getting these 2-story apartment buildings. I can't imagine going back to them again and saying, yes, this is what we approved back then. Now we've got another application before you. We want to go up 1 story higher. Like, when is it going to stop? Enfield is already mapped out to have umpteen apartment buildings, and I'm just trying to preserve what we've got left. And if that's village core and if that's what is permitted, let's just stop this right here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Garden Cole. Yes, go ahead, Debbie.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to clarify that this application isn't in addition to what's already there, that it would just replace what's already there. If it was ever approved, the other one, the site plan approval would be removed, and so they would only have the one option to do the R3. And the number of dwelling units are the same on both of them. It's just, as Councilor Garden Cole mentioned, it's the form of the development that's changing.
Go ahead.
But it is increasing 1 story higher, right?
Through you, Mr. Chair. It's a 1 story higher, yes. So in this case, it would be 3-story buildings. In the site plan approval, it's 2-story buildings. However, I should mention that under the regulations for the village core, I believe they can have 2.5 stories as of right, and then if you had commercial on the ground floor, you could be higher than that in the village core zone.
So this is an additional story to what
Yes,
is
yeah.
proposed right now, as well as underground parking, which raises it even higher because that isn't totally submerged under the ground.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't know if there's any requirements with grade differences in the R3 zone or not. I know some, like the mixed-use center zone, there's a grade requirement that it can't be stuck out of the ground too far.
Yeah,
I'd
so
have
no-
to do a little bit more research.
So, yeah, there's no surprises with that, just that after the residents already accepting what was put in front of them 2 years ago, this would be proposing to go up one more story, and that's what I'm objecting to.
Anything else, Counselor?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Eisner.
Through you, Chair, the staff, will it be, the highway lights be put in the hardware store before this?
Through Mr. Chair, this is just the initial report, and so we haven't sent it off to Nova Scotia Public Works for any review by them yet, so I don't know if a traffic study will be required or if they'll require any infrastructure changes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Musa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I remember when the approval came two years ago, and most of the complaint from the resident was about clear cutting all the lot and about the parking and about the garbage being close to the home. So I think this proposal, to me, it's much better. It gives privacy to it's gonna keep the trees. It's gonna it's more greener than the other one. And I think it's the least we could do is hear from those residents that if this is better or the other one is better. I think by going to a information meeting, we're just allowing us to hear and probably the new councillor to hear from the resident around the property. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Warden Rolston.
Yeah, just a question. Should this property be rezoned as requested? Then something entirely different than this could be done on the property as of right.
Mr. Chair, they could have a maximum, based on the area and the frontage, they could have a maximum of 3 lots with 24 dwelling units on each lot. That could be arranged differently. It doesn't have to look like what you see here. That's correct. Under the plan update, by development agreement, those regulations that are coming in place, they could change the number of buildings on the site. So instead of just one 24-unit building, they could do 2 12-unit buildings on one property by development agreement. However, there's also a clause in there stating that they could only do a maximum of 24 dwelling units per 0.3 hectares of area of land. And based on the size of this property, they can't get 4, it only allows for the 72 units, even by development agreement. So that's the maximum they can get out of this property, unless they buy land adjacent, and I'm not quite sure what's next door.
Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Warden Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, under this current proposal, I mean, it's still pretty early. We're going to public information meeting, but this one has a lot more green space and appears to take away a lot of that hard surface. So I know there was conversations before when we were doing this about water runoff and garbage and underground parking. The garbage is contained under the building, which takes away from a lot of the rodent problem. So I'm going to move the recommended motion that authorize staff to schedule a public information meeting to consider the application for ELT Property Holdings Limited to amend the MPS and LUB by changing the land use designation of PID 45118-221 and PID 45078-748 to medium density residential neighborhood and rezoning some lands to multiple unit residential, R Zone 3, because I think it's important that we do hear from the residents of what they think the difference between the two is, and we get their input, because that's the next step before we have to make a decision.
Do we have a seconder? Second by Counselor Green. Counselor Ryan, you were on before the motion, so I'll give you some.
Thank you. I tend to agree with my fellow counselors from the area there, for the area. I don't think we're doing the community of Enfield right, because, you know, we're not really creating community. We're creating shoeboxes and filling them full of people. You can just drive up and down there. It's not appealing at all down there. Well, I feel for the people who have R1 and R2 properties in that area. You know, to me, we're not creating that community. We're just filling it with land with people, and that's basically, you know, where do we stop? And I really think that this should be really examined what's going on, because I don't think it's really, I don't think it's doing East Hants any good by just filling it up and putting that much density on a small area. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Warden Rolston, I'll give you some leeway.
My comments just were that this is already approved for 72 units by site plan approval. This new configuration, if this change went through, is still for 72 units. And I hear, you know, very clearly, I understand what the area councilor's saying, I do. And to me, I would support going to public information meeting, because I want to know, you know, does the public prefer this new plan, or does the public prefer the old plan? And if the public says, no, we want to stick with what's already been approved, well, you know, I'm probably going to listen to what they have to say. But on the off chance that this is an improvement over what was planned before and is more appealing, why, I'd like to know that too. So where we're just at the public information meeting stage, I'm prepared to wait and hear what the public has to say on it. And at the end of the day, they may just be done with it. It's hard to say, but I'd like to hear the information. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Warden. Nobody else wishing to speak? What is your wish? Questions being called? We'll go to the vote. And the motion is passed with a 11-2, with Councillor Rhino and Councillor Garden Cole voting nay. Thank you, Debbie. Next item on the agenda is the PLN 21-009 FH Development Group, Inc. Initial reading of mapping amendments and initial consideration of a development agreement. Back to you, Debbie.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So the applicant is, again, FH Development Group, Inc. It's located, the property is located here in yellow, and it's along Highway 2 and 102, so it's in between both of those highways. The size of the subject property is 111 hectares, and the proposal is to amend the municipal planning strategy and land use bylaw and to enter into a development agreement for a mixed-use master plan neighborhood, including a mixture of low, medium, and higher density residential development, open space, and commercial uses. Adjoining zones, so there's the, again, walkable comprehensive development district that's next door, and that's Armco Capital Link property. Across Highway 2 is the rural use zone, and that land is actually owned by, I believe, a gypsum mining company. And then to the other side here, to the north, is other property zoned rural use. And just to note that the subject property is the last property within that serviceable boundary, so it's the last property within that boundary. So There's approximately 1,500 dwelling units, a little bit less, proposed as part of the application. Single unit dwellings is 365, and those are identified here in both those yellow orangish colors. Yep. 2 unit dwellings, 164, and that's the blue, the darker blue. Townhouse units is 236, and that's in the lighter blue. And again, there's some on-street townhouses, and there are some townhouses that would be in the cluster format at the back. Multiple unit dwellings proposed to be 690, and those are in this pinkish color right here. So there's some just on the entrance of the new road that would come in into the development off of Highway 2, and then some along Highway 2 itself. And then there's some commercial lands in this kind of red color right here. There's also conservation areas because there's 2 large wetlands on the subject properties. There's one down here closer to Highway 2 and one in the middle. And then there's the Barney's Brook land conservation area around that. Stormwater management areas, those are in the light blue, and they're located throughout the development. So this just shows how the FH development proposal fits in with the neighboring Armco Capital Link lands. So again, much of the development is dependent on Armco building out. The proposed application has 3 different phases. The first phase would be coming off of Highway 2, and it goes up to about here. The second phase is in this middle part, and then the third phase is at the very end on the other side of on the other side of Barney's Brook, and borders on Highway 102. So there's a park proposed for each phase of the development, and these are considered neighborhood parks under the Parks, Open Space, and Active Transportation Master Plan that the council has adopted. So again, there's a little park here that would service this area. A little park here that would service phase 2, and then there's a smaller park here that would service phase 3, but there would also be the Barney's Brook Trail that we would ask for a piece of land along there. This trail system would extend from the Armco Capital Link lands and go along Barney's Brook and go along for about 2.6 kilometers, so it would make a nice trail and go to the northern edge of the property. Also, just to note that throughout the development, there would be street trees, there would be sidewalks, and on this route that comes in here would be an active transportation route on one side and a sidewalk on the other side, and that would stop up to about here, and then the active transportation route would connect in and go up through here. This here would also be wide enough to allow for a future transit route if that ever became a possibility within the municipality. The applicant has provided us with some concept drawings. Now these, I have to say, are just concepts, and this isn't what's going to take place within the development, but this is what they're imagining. So on that piece of corner property here and right here, this is where they're proposing the commercial areas. Again, they're thinking about fast food restaurants and service station, car wash on that corner lot. This wouldn't access directly onto Highway 2. Instead, it would access onto the new road and come out. That new road would then come out onto Highway 2. The second property along there would be for additional commercial development. This would be more of the strip commercial development, and it would be on the lot right next door here. So this here is a sample along Highway 2 of some apartment buildings, and they're proposed to have commercial on the ground floor of the front 2 here, where the rest of them would propose to be 6 stories. And then this one here would be a complete residential unit. And the back of this one here would probably stay pretty green because there's a giant wetland in the back, whereas some of these other ones, of course, wouldn't. This here, they're proposing 6-story apartment buildings. As again, I said, this is just concept. It doesn't actually show what the road would look like. So this would be the new road going into development. So you'd have the active transportation route on one side, the sidewalk on the other side. You'd have your street trees. These here would be set back a little bit farther off that front property line. And this doesn't show any of the articulation of the buildings. And we haven't counted a parking spaces or amenity space, and you'd have to have refuge storage. So there's still, these are just rough concept plans at this point. Policy analysis. So the planning application has two parts, the mapping amendments and the development agreement. Both parts of the application will be processed together. However, the development agreement will be contingent on the MPS and LEB mapping amendments being approved. Council's policy goal of the Walkable Comprehensive Development District is to establish an avenue for the consideration of relatively large-scale mixed-use and phased development proposals using the Comprehensive Development District tool. These developments should create a development conducive of active transportation through human-scale developments designed to create visual interest at street level. Developments are also permitted and encouraged to use creativity through alternative roadway standard and new urbanism development principles. So we've requested and received comments from our reviewing agencies. I think there's still 2 outstanding that we haven't received. So Nova Scotia Public Works, a traffic impact study has been completed, and that was posted for the information of PAC members. So that has been completed and submitted to Nova Scotia Public Works. Northbound, the study recommends a northbound left turn lane from Highway 2 into the development. The study also recommends lowering the Highway 2 speed limit by shifting the existing speed transition zone from Robert Scott Drive northward to beyond the South Corridor Commercial Growth Management Area. This would lower the speed limit to 60 kilometers an hour in the study area. In addition, the study also recommends that Nova Scotia Public Works begins long-term transportation planning for the corridor. The RCMP have commented, and they have concerns with traffic in general in the corridor from the continued growth of the community, and we have passed on these concerns to Nova Scotia Public Works for their consideration. The Shenectady Center for Education, they've commented. They've had a change in staff for their Director of Operational Services, and they've indicated that the proposed development does have the potential to impact schools in the area, and while there is capacity currently in the schools, this potential development, along with the current growth, will increase the schools towards capacity and will require additional supporting elements, for example, staff, space, and resources. The Director of Operational Services also states that the Shenectady Regional Center for Education will consider this information to supplement their planning tools as they evaluate the capacity and utilization during their planning process. So basically, they're going to take all the information that we give to them and use it for their planning purposes in the future. We have offered to meet with the Center for Education to discuss the expected population growth, and we hope to do that in the not too distant future. Parks, Recreation, Culture Department has reviewed the application and has provided FH Development Group Inc. with their comments. The walkways in between the blocks are not part of the open space calculations. They are infrastructure requirement under the subdivision bylaw. Parks, Rec and Culture has also requested that the size of the park in Phase 1 be increased from 4,000 meters squared to 4,950 meters squared to provide park space to the approximately 2,160 residents who could potentially live in Phase 1 of the proposed development. Economic and Business Development staff have provided feedback to the consultant regarding the proposed commercial development, and the consultant has reviewed their feedback. Infrastructure and operations, in addition to the standard comments regarding servicing, I&O indicated that traffic calming measures would be required throughout the development. No more than 300 dwelling units would be permitted before a second public road to service the development would be required, and water and sewer servicing will be subject to available capacity at the time of tentative subdivision approval. To date, Nova Scotia Environment and Climate Change has not provided any comments. As for citizen engagement, the advertisement outlined in the application indicating that it had been received and was under review with staff was placed in the Chronicle Herald. An open house and public information meeting was held on May 3rd, and those notes have been included in the staff report. If council gives first reading to the application, staff will mail questionnaires to property owners within 300 meters of the subject lands, and results of the questionnaires will be provided in the following staff report. And the recommendation is that PAC give first reading to the MPS and LEB mapping amendments and initial consideration to the development agreement, and authorize staff to schedule a public hearing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Debbie. Warden Rolston.
Thank you. Could we look at the map again, please?
This one, or would you like this one here?
It doesn't, either or. I just want to see the egress.
through-
Highway 2.
So the egress is to and out of the site would be down here at the very corner. And that was actually recommended as part of the traffic study because it starts to go uphill here. So this has the best stop site distances. And then it would be connection into the Armco lands, which would have another egress right across from Robert Scott Drive. And then
Okay, so is that built out yet? Is that egress there in the Armco lands yet?
Mr. Chair, no, it's not.
Okay, and that exit there that you show me going down to the corner of a lot on the map I'm looking at on my computer is labeled a 3-meter AT trail.
Mr. Chair, I think it's an access, but right beside it, there's a 3-meter a 3-meter AT trail that runs along the side of the
Okay,
roadway.
okay. And did I understand you to say that when they get to 200 units, they'd have to have another exit?
300 dwelling units, so that doesn't matter. So it could be apartment dwelling units, or it could be the townhouse units, or it could be the
So what happened
semi-detached.
to our 100 unit rule?
Through the development agreements that were negotiated, all of them have been allowed to have more than the 100 dwelling units, so they've been able to go above the 100 dwelling units permitted in the subdivision bylaw. For
You've
example,
lost me. After what we just went through with wildfires in our neighboring municipality, you've lost me.
okay.
I'm sorry, seeing video footage of people trying to get out of those subdivisions with their lives. I just could not bring myself at this time to support anything that reduced the requirements for entrance and exits into new subdivisions. Cannot ethically support it, sorry.
So, Mr. Chair, on that, so that rule in the subdivision bylaw is really meant so that we don't, on a permanent basis, get subdivisions that only have one access. In these larger developments that are phased, I guess with the DAs we've done so far, I guess we've been comfortable enough knowing there is that second and third, in some cases fourth exit coming as in future phases of the development. So in those ones, council has permitted them to go above that 100 with the initial exit as the development phases in.
And I do understand that, and I may be the lone voice in the wilderness here, and that's fine, but my comfort level is not what it was a month ago. And I can't help it, that's just how I feel. Thank you.
Thank you, Warden. Councilor Musa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'm on your side too. You're not alone in that because we all seen what happened, and it's being close as I was to the fire. Oh my God, it's horrible. And I have one more concern. Like, I know the warden have talked about it before, but those high densities are gonna kill our rural area. Like, we're already gonna lose a lot of councilors over there, and our representation, like the shape of the municipality is gonna be a city and few spots around it. And I'm not liking what I'm seeing now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Deputy Warden Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to staff. Understanding that, I guess, would be pink, excuse me, I'm colorblind, color there at the very beginning by the roads are the high-density development.
Just a minute, Debbie.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
It would be this section right here,
Yes.
right here, and then at the end over here.
And those all being phase one, and I believe the numbers was those three high densities would have proposed 690 units.
Yes, that's correct.
So before they even finish phase one, they would be required to have a second entrance because they now have exceeded 300 units, correct?
Yes, so once, they wouldn't be able to get another under what's proposed right now, this could change, that's not a problem. Once they reached the 300 dwelling unit, that would be it. They wouldn't receive a permit for anything above that.
So they couldn't even build those 3 buildings without having to provide a second exit because they would hit the 300 units before they finished those buildings.
Through you, Mr. Chair, they could build like maybe 1 or 2 buildings.
They build 2
Yeah.
buildings and then they would
Yeah.
be required to have a second
Yeah.
access.
Or they could skip the buildings and go in and do the townhouses or something like that, for example.
So, yeah, it'd be very interesting because I totally get the concern, and we're hearing from residents who live in old neighborhoods which have one way in, one way out, or provincial roads that only have one way in, one way out, go to a dead end, and it is something to consider going forward. It does, on this picture, look pretty and fit in with the rest of the development to make it a complete development. But there's definitely some questions that need to be answered going forward about, what is phase 1? Because if it's 300 units, they have to have a second exit. They won't even be able to get approval for phase 1. It'll be a portion of phase 1. So it'd be a lot more information if we knew that going forward. So I believe this is the first step to go to a public information meeting, correct? Or where are we at?
No,
This is the,
through you, Mr. Chair, is for initial consideration of the mapping amendments, of the development agreement and first reading of the mapping amendments.
because I really think there needs to be an understanding of how they want to develop this. I understand that developers need the flexibility, right? Like
Yeah.
they're going to develop based upon the needs of the market. And right now, if there's a lot of apartment buildings going up, they might go to the townhouses. They might go to, some of those are two units for just diversity. But understanding, I look at that phase 1, and their second egress is totally dependent on a separate contractor, developer, sorry.
Through you, Mr. Chair, and also the way that it's set up, they don't have to have the structures built. So they come in for phase 1 of the development, for example, for tentative plan of subdivision. They get tentative plan of subdivision. They put in the roads. They can submit for phase 2. They don't have to build anything until phase 2 submitted. Or how we have it set up in the other development agreements is that they can come in for 2 phases as long as it's okay with Nova Scotia Public Works, our own engineers, and the development officer and Parks and Rec and Culture, that they can submit for 2 phases at the same time. So a phase just means you're submitting for tentative plan of subdivision, which means you get your roads engineered and everything's good in respect to your construction drawings and such. It doesn't mean that all those dwelling units have to be constructed before you go on to the next phase.
Okay, because I think when it's built out, it's going to have the safety and security that we need with 3-4 exits in and out of the whole development. And of course, it's all service, so there will be access to water, I imagine, hydrants and
Yes, you'll have your hydrants.
and such going through the development. But I just, that number of 300 does seem quite high. Something to think about. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Deputy Warden. Councilor Garden Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. Just to clarify, when I look at this kind of development set off in a space by itself that's going to be developed with apartment buildings and townhouses, all knowing that this is coming, this is what is intended right from the beginning, I don't have objections to this. Yes, maybe the numbers need to be lowered, or they need to go back to the drawing board about exits and when the second exit has to come. It's when the big apartment buildings are put right on the side of your little number 2 highway going through a little community. That's what my residents are objecting to. And as a resident myself, that is what I'm objecting to. When you are changing the whole face of your community, not adding little communities like this in a big area that can accommodate them. But I do have concerns as well about a second exit in lieu of what's happened. And also, as the Deputy Warden said, about a second exit hinging on another developer making it happen. So, thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Tingley.
through the chair, I do have some concerns with the safety factor of just having one exit as well. I'm just wondering if staff have any other suggestions of what can be done to address this concern, because it seems like several other councillors have the same concern. The other thing I wanted to ask about is, as we're building out these apartment buildings, do we have any say into the cooling systems that go into these apartments? You know, as we're building big apartment buildings, they're obviously going to have heat, but you know, our temperatures are getting higher for longer periods of time. Do we have any control over the construction of these buildings to ensure that they're cool enough for the people that are going to be living in them?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll just answer the first one first. Anything to do with the heating or cooling systems in a building would come under the National Building Code, and would be something that a building inspector would have to answer. As for the number of dwelling units, we could go back to what's permitted in the subdivision bylaw and only allow for 100 dwelling units before a second access is required, and that's not a problem. We can do that easy enough.
And finally, the other thing I have a little bit of concern about as we're building out, I don't know how fast it's going to get built out, but I have a little concern about the traffic that's on the highway number 2, and having an actual plan, seeing a plan from Public Works as to what's going to happen here. Are we just going to wait till we're overwhelmed with traffic, or at what point do we get to see a plan?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So the traffic impact study has been submitted to Nova Scotia Public Works. I haven't received their comments to date, so I don't know if they're accepting the plan as it is, but the plan does recommend that Nova Scotia Public Works look at the, what do they say? Begins work on a long-term transportation planning for the corridor. So looking at the entire corridor as a holistic development rather than individual developments, and come up with a plan for the whole corridor. Now, that's what their recommendation is. I don't know how Nova Scotia Public Works would respond, and once I hear back from them, those comments will be in the final staff report.
Okay, so can we press for that? Like,
I'll
because
let John respond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We can. I mean, we'll wait for the comments to come back, and if they haven't addressed that issue, then we can go back to them again and send, this is a concern of council. We want to know what your long-term plan is in the corridor, and you know, when and where this study might come up. I would say that the process is probably going to be a little messier or more iterative. That is, you know, we're not going to be able to stop all development, I don't think, until there's a master plan in place. You know, that recommendation's there because they're seeing this development. And, you know, like the Lance Interchange, which was thought about 20 years ago and then finally happened as development proceeded, I think, you know, we might see something like that going forward.
well, that's good to hear. I certainly don't want to be blocking any development. We just got back from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities meetings, and everybody's saying the same thing right across Canada. The demand for housing is just incredible. It requires a monumental wartime effort to get enough places built. And you know, we were talking about these fires in Tantallon. You have another 200 houses that need to be built on top of the demands that were already there. It's incredible. And I understand Councillor Garden Cole's concerns about the changing community, but it is in fact going to get built out through the corridor here. Like, this is where the services are, and it seems logical to have these large apartments closer to the highway, so that traffic is not traveling all through the subdivisions to get to it. It's certainly changing our community. Like, this is not the community that I grew up here in 50 years ago, but we have to adjust to it. Like, you know, people need houses to live in. What I'm hearing is every apartment that comes up for rent, there's like 50 or 100 applications for it. Anyway, I don't want to block, I'm certainly not wanting to block any development, but I do have a little concern with the safety there, and I would like to see some planning. I lose a little faith when I can't see a better plan, or some kind of a plan, instead of just getting it pushed out all the time. That's it.
Thank you, Counselor. Warden Rolston.
Thank you. Well, I think it's safe to say that the events of the past month or so, to borrow a phrase from a former CAO of many years ago, has changed the water on the beans for a lot of things. And I couldn't sleep at night if I thought that I was voting in favor of something that could result in endangering people's lives who moved into these communities. And we never thought it would happen before, really, but now we know it can, and that makes a difference to me. I also share concerns about the capacity of the number 2 highway to handle all the traffic of all these developments that are being built, and I understand the need for housing. However, I do disagree respectfully with the one comment that we can't stop all development until we see a plan. Sure we can. We can stop it or we can slow it down until we see a plan. And I think maybe we have a responsibility if we see a problem in the future because the upgrades haven't been done to the number 2, or we don't see a plan for upgrades to the number 2. I don't know how in all good conscience we can just continue to approve, knowing that we're approving a mess, a disaster possibly. Because even if you get 2 or 3 exits onto the number 2, when you look at those maps of all those developments, if all those people are trying to get out of those developments at the same time in a hurry, that's a problem. So like I said, and that's not the fault of this developer. I mean, this is a lovely looking development, don't get me wrong. But the thinking for me has now somewhat different than it was before. And I think it's incumbent upon us to put safety as the number 1 priority with this. And if that means exits sooner even than the 100, than the 100 units, like if we want to see the exits up front before we see, then that might be the responsible thing to do. I know it's more expensive for developers, but I don't think there are any developers out there that want to be caught in a situation where they're designing developments that aren't seen as being safe either. And so that's my concern. And this is, if you go back to the map, I looked at it and it's a long lot with a lot of development and then a big kind of green or wooded area there in the middle. And then when you go across to the other end of the development, I see there's some kind of a driveway or something there, but I don't know where it's going to because that's the highway. But if you look there, it says road or driveway there in the middle. No, keep going, right down to the highway in the blue.
Right here?
No, right there. Like, where's that going? What is that?
Through Mr. Chair, I think it's just it's a jug out from the 102.
It's labeled road or driveway.
I'll look into it, but as far as I know, it's just owned by Nova Scotia Public Works. I have one in the back of my lot too. That's a jug out of my lot that's owned by Nova Scotia Public Works.
Okay. Well, like I said, I don't like to be throw the cold water on everything, but I don't have the comfort level I used to have approving these, and I always had some reservations because, as Councillor Musa said, this is not only changing the communities of Milford and Lance and in the corridor area, it's changing the rural community that I come from. because our population is not really, it's pretty much holding its own, and in some areas it's increasing, certainly not at this rate. And people feel that they're losing representation because we don't have, 3 councillors won't have in the Hants North area anymore. Not because we've lost population, but because population has grown so much here. And I understand proportional I understand the whole thing, but it does change the nature of the entire municipality. And that's concerning. And growth is growth, but I have never believed in growth just for the sake of growth. I don't believe that all growth is always good. And I believe that we need to see a plan for Highway 2 in particular with all these large developments sooner rather than later. And I believe that for me to be comfortable supporting this, I need to see another exit sooner rather than later. And I don't need to just see it on a map. I need to see it going to be built sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Thank you, Warden. Councilor Rhino.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to mirror what the warden said. Like, I was around here when we bumped that, when we made the law to no more than 100 lots, and then you had to bump up to a second exit, right, entrance. Although, going back to what I said before, not creating a community, this creates more of a community in my mind than some of these have been done. But, the big but, you can have 300 units before you kicks in, you have to have a second? No, I don't buy that one little bit, because wildfires are unpredictable. They don't go by the number of units are there. They just start, and they don't hold no favorites. So, but I liken the number 2. We're building all this, like the warden said, we're building, allowing this to happen with no changes to that number 2. Not one iota of change. And that's could be the Hammonds Plains Road in East Hants when those wildfires went on. That could be the same thing. We're gonna bring all that traffic out on the number 2. And then she's gonna, if you can get out on the number 2, if there was an evacuation to take place. So the road system has to change, and it has to keep up to the development here. And really, I can't support anything up to 300 units before you kick into another exit. It's 100 for me, and that's my opinion. Thank you.
Through Mr. Chair, we can make that change.
Deputy Warden Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to staff. At what point and how far, when the roads and services are being installed, do the fire hydrants and fire services apparatuses go? Are they expected to be installed for the entire phase before houses are built, or how is the hydrant system incorporated into development at what phase?
Through Mr. Chair, if I understand your question correctly, Councilor Perry, basically all the services are put in at the time attempted to plan a subdivision. So they get attempted to plan a subdivision, then they have to go build everything. So they put all their pipes underground and everything as per the municipal standards. So the spacing of your fire hydrants and all that stuff would be determined. The only thing that INO has put on their comments, and they put this on any comments for apartment buildings, is your pressure for your fire flows within your apartment buildings isn't guaranteed. So then the applicant would have to determine that their fire pressure system for that apartment building, if they need something to.
The internal pumps for fire suppression.
Yeah. I'm not sure if the director of INO wants to comment further, but.
Go ahead, Jesse.
Yeah, through Mr. Chair, just a continuation of what Debbie described. She described it well. we get into the crux of the design, and it's up to the developer's engineer to develop the fire flow design for the build out and demonstrate that it can be received, and they have to adapt and demonstrate and sign off on that before it gets built. So something I would forecast is that we are anticipating, and at some point, not necessarily on this development, but in Lance in general, another water tower. So that is in the capital forecast, and that will have to take place at some point in the future. It's likely to happen to the left side of this development in the adjacent one. So there's one ideal location, and then there's two other optional locations for water towers that have been discussed by staff in the area. But that is something that will have to get into play, and that could, so it could be a part of the development gets built until a next water tower gets built, or, but it depends at what's happened right across the system at that point in time. And those are the checks that happen every time a new phase comes in for approval review. So there's checks and balances through there.
Okay, thank you. No, because my whole thinking is, what separates this from the wildfires that happened in Tentallon and, even the ones that were Mount Uniacke last summer is this is a serviced area, right? Those were on-serviced areas. So to have to truck in all the water to fight the fire, the response time and everything is a lot longer. Here with a hydrant system, you can actually get on the ground and start doing the engaging the fire and doing that stuff a lot easier. And there's more multiple points to access without having to rely on trucking in all the water. So part of that goes into my thinking about, safety reasons, right? Like this makes it a better situation if the worst case scenario ever happened, because they don't have to rely on trucking all the water in and getting mutual aid and getting all those tankers in here. You can have trucks on site, and the firefighters who are here on council will know that situation a lot better than I would. But where it is a serviced area, I think as part of, you look at risk mitigation, yes, the large number of homes to be approved is one thing, but we also have to look at the fact that this will be serviced by fire hydrants. Some of the buildings obviously will have sprinkler systems and things like that. And the natural kind of barrier for a wildfire is a wetland. Wetlands slow down fires when they happen because of just the nature of the ground of being wet and moist. So with the major wetlands there, it also allows a bit of a barrier for that as well. Nothing's 100% safe ever. None of our homes are 100% safe ever. I just think, though, in a built-up area with full services, those considerations have to be thought of as well. And as Councillor Rhino and Councillor Garden-Cole already said, like, when you look at this whole map as a planned community with parks and commercial, this one, I think, there's only one building along Highway 2 because the commercial blocked the other buildings going up, and the other property has a land there that doesn't do there. So there's two going halfway up the road and only one actually down on Highway 2. So this end of the development with the apartments just being set back off of Highway 2 a little bit, I think is pretty good as well. So I definitely do think we need to, and as Debbie already mentioned, we can have those discussions with the developer to think about safety second exits, because I would imagine a lot of the developers are now relooking at things themselves as well. Like, we're not operating here in a vacuum. They're having these same conversations, I would imagine, internally, because remember, they're going to be working in there as well when phase one is done. They're going to be working in there for the foreseeable future. And so their people and their subcontractors, they have to manage that safety aspect as well. That's what I got to say for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Warden. Go ahead, Jesse, follow up.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I did want to comment on the long-term traffic plan through the area, and it may be ideal to do a refresh in the future of what was done in 2014. In 2014, there was a report published. It was conducted by CBCL, and it was funded in a joint effort through the municipality and the province about traffic planning through Lance, and it was really focused on locating where the Lance interchange now ultimately sits. Within that, it projected out, there was assumptions made at the time on developments and development phasing of when it would happen and what intersections could look like. So it highlights on the intersections of the overpass here on the 214. It highlights the intersection of Highway 2 and the 277. And it also highlights what could happen beyond the Lance interchange at a high level, but more data has to happen at that point. So there has been some foresight into that, and I just wanted to highlight that because that doesn't come out in the report. There are some tentative plans. They're just not all detailed here with each intersection. There might be an opportunity to refresh and update and have some discussions on that. But I would say that what has been discussed along Highway 2 is that conversation has started, and it did start with analysis from that 2014 study, which is available online and right on the municipal website. So that's available, and perhaps that's something we could review in more detail or do a refresher on it if that was the will of executive committee.
Thank you, Jesse. Councilor McPhee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to clarify a point that the warden made about the little notch in the label there. The label refers to a proposed road which would go, well, I'm looking at it in closer detail, between the rows of yellow houses. It doesn't refer to the notch in the TIR right-of-way. There's a line there that you can see if you zoom in that shows a proposed road that runs in behind the yellow lots there, and it runs up right there. And that's what that label refers to.
Just a minute. Thank you, Councilor. Go ahead, Debbie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So yes, that is a private driveway to service cluster townhouses. INO haven't determined if they're going to 100% approve that yet until they get some more information about what's being constructed back here.
Nobody else wish? Warden Rolston.
I'm going to move that we discontinue allowing developments to exceed the 100 lot minimum before requiring a second entrance.
So moved in second. Questions being called? Councilor Garden Cole.
So just to clarify that, that's just from now going forward? Like the development that's happening in Elmsdale with the big apartment buildings at the back of Maple Ridge subdivision going in through?
I don't have the ability to go backwards.
Okay,
or I would.
thank you.
CEO, wish to comment?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I would just ask John, is that something that needs to be thought through and documented of where that needs to be documented?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So I would take a motion like that as direction for when we're negotiating DAs like this, because the as of right is already covered in the subdivision bylaw. That's my understanding of the intent.
So through you, Mr. Chair, can we have that as the actual motion, that staff not be permitted to negotiate above 100 units in a development agreement prior to coming to council? Does that work?
It's the same thing. I'm fine as long as that's what it does.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to me, the difference is that this motion is written, if it goes to council, then all future councils are tied to that. In this case, if the intent is that staff not negotiate before getting here, then that's a cleaner motion from a staff perspective.
Warden Rolston for clarification.
Well, I'm fine with it, but I don't believe that all future councils would be tied to it. They can rescind motions and change policies and regulations at any time, the same as we can. So, but, you know, I just, I don't want, I don't want subdivisions built anymore without more than one entrance and exit, however it needs to be worded.
Is that all, Warden?
Yes.
Just a quick question to the staff. Will this affect anything going forward that's already approved? Oops, sorry, John.
Through you, Mr. Chair, as with all planning regulation, it's always a go forward. So anything that's already either been approved or actually even in the application process, whatever somebody applies for on the day the regulations are in place, that's what we process. So it would only be go forward.
Go ahead.
This is the only large-scale application that you have, that you're looking at right now. Everything else has been approved, so anything coming forward, we would do that. But this is the only one that has over that 100 dwelling units anyways, over.
Councilor Rhino.
Well, a point of clarification, is not the 100 unit, in effect, where after you reach 100 units, you have to have 2 exits and entrance? Is that not right now in law?
Through you, Mr. Chair, through the subdivision bylaw, it's you can get approval for up to 100 lots before you need a second access. So that's in the subdivision bylaw. However, this is a development agreement, so there's the ability to negotiate. And then in the past, we have negotiated with the developer to allow for more than the 100 dwelling units. For the Armco, I believe it was 300. I think for the other application there, FH application in Elmsdale, it was over 300, maybe 350. And the Clayton one, I'm not quite sure what the numbers are.
Well, really, for me, I would think that 100 unit, the bylaw that we put in would follow whatever we were creating. You can call this a subdivision itself, because it is. You're subdividing land, and you've got all this land, you're gonna do all this budget. So what, to me, what would be the difference? I would say, why do we need this motion? Because in my mind, that should have been following every other development since it was brought into, installed as a bylaw here. And I really don't know why, how that got to be a bargaining chip with regard to development such as this. Now, if you can clarify that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess it's because you're negotiating a DA. There is an overall plan for the development. We know what it's going to look like in the future, so that's why I guess staff in the past felt comfortable recommending to council that we could go above the 100 before that second exit is there. And you're able to do that because once you enter into a DA, you can actually set aside or I guess supplant some of the provisions both in the land use bylaw and the subdivision bylaw. So when the development officer is reviewing a subdivision plan, she no longer just refers to the subdivision bylaw. She'll also look at the development agreement and see if it allows anything like this over and above what the subdivision bylaw would allow. So that's the mechanism.
It still does not sit well with me, because if we created that, it would, to me, it was in my mind going for everything forward that would be 100 units. I mean, that's what I remember the conversation that went around this table. And I'm thinking, right, that subdivision by the mill was a perfect example of what we were talking about, was in the middle of that conversation. I think Councillor Mitchell was on that at that time. So to me, I don't see any difference between a development agreement and a subdivision, because you're still subdividing land in each. And to me, that should have followed along, and that should have been kept in law right straight through and been enforced. Thank you.
And through you, Mr. Chair, I mean, it's pretty loud and clear, I think, that that's where the committee's probably going to go. And that's fine. That can be changed in the DA so that you can't have more than 100 dwelling units off of one exit. That's not a big deal. I mean, it'll certainly impact the developers' plans in terms of their phasing, but it's something you can require for sure.
Anything else, Counselor?
No, thanks.
Thank you. Warden Rolston.
Yeah, understanding that, and I guess, quite frankly, we have to bear the blame for that. I missed that. I didn't realize that we were approving more than 100 lots. And those, it was probably there. They were large developments, lots of stuff in the development agreement. I missed it. I missed it. Didn't realize it. This motion fixes that. It doesn't allow it to happen again, which is the best we can do at this point, other than hope that developers themselves will kind of relook at things and make sure things happen in a timely manner, so.
Mr. Chair, I should clarify that we've actually caught something in these DAs that's actually not covered in the subdivision bylaw, because the subdivision bylaw just deals with lots. So when we looked at these large development agreements with a large number of multi-unit buildings, we thought, wow, you could actually get up, to 500 units or 600 units before you actually had to have a second exit. So we set the number at 300 units as opposed to lots in the development agreements. And that seemed a reasonable compromise to us instead of just tying it to lots, because you do have so many lots with multi-unit buildings on them.
Follow-up, Warden?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, then is there some way we can amend our process for that 100 units to be everywhere?
We can. I guess we'll have to go back and look at the way it's structured and what regulation it would come under, but it can be reviewed for sure, yeah.
I mean, that would be my advice, because I'd much rather be safe than sorry. Thank you.
Thank you, Warden. Deputy Warden Perry.
Speaking not in favor of the motion, for the simple fact is, when you look at a planned community versus a one-off subdivision, as was put forward by the Director of Planning, it was 100 lots is actually our bylaw. In the development agreement, it goes by units. And if this one here particularly, it talks about 600 and some odd units in the 3 apartment buildings that are in the first phase of the development. When you're looking at construction and keeping the cost down for not just the developer, but whatever the cost increase get passed on to the consumer. And all of a sudden they're finished one apartment building and they have to stop construction on the other 2 or delay. And it just increases the cost for everybody. And that cost always gets borne by the individual who ends up renting or buying later on. The footprint of a multi-unit development compared to a single home or a townhouse development reaching that 100 units is completely different in size, shape, and everything else. When you look at those multi-unit buildings, they are all required to have fire suppression systems and all this stuff. I get the intent of what the motion is trying to achieve. I just think that if we start nitpicking and hamstringing certain things, we have to look at the bigger picture. This is not a rural development where there's nothing around, as I stated before. This is in a fully serviced area. And if we're looking at building a community, they have to have the ability to build the community out in a certain way of a geographical space. If we just restrict it to 100 units, they probably can't even get half of one development of apartment buildings built. And, it'd be like you building your house and not being able to build your garage, right? You gotta wait. Well, now you have to wait for all of your services and everything to come back. That just increases cost, and the cost always get borne to the public. And You know, I've had nothing but good interactions and everything with all the developers we've had in East Hants. And I just think we have to look at also the people who are going to live here, understanding the safety, understanding everything else. But if we're looking back at what happened in another area that had different conditions and different things set upon it, and trying to impose that into a new area, it can be kind of a bit of a knee-jerk reaction. And I just don't think at this time I can support that motion without having a report come back detailing the size and distance of what it would take. Because if you're talking about 3 apartment buildings, 600 units, and then the stretch of road that it would take up is 0.4 of a kilometer, or are you talking about going in deep into a development, 2-3 kilometers of development? It creates a whole different concept of safety and security to be able to get to the access point to get out to safety, especially in a serviced area. So the blanketing of things without looking at things in context, the reason why we have development agreements is to be able to look at those items in that type of microscope, trusting our well-trained staff to provide us with a recommendation. We don't always have to take the recommendation, but we have to give them the ability to provide that recommendation to us, hamstringing them to not allow them any negotiations which could impact beyond the fiscal thing, whether projects go forward or whatever. So for that, I can't support this motion.
Thank you, Deputy Warden. Warden Rolston.
Respectfully listen to the deputy warden's comments, but for me, 600 and some units, 300 and some units, doesn't matter if it's an apartment or if it's a house, it's the same amount of people trying to get out of somewhere in an emergency at the same time. And that's where I'm coming at. You need the exits to get the vehicles and the people out. And I know there are fire hydrants and things, but those aren't all going to be miraculously manned and in use if something happens fast, and wildfires happen fast. So I know we're preparing for what a month ago would have seemed like an extremely unlikely event, and maybe it's still unlikely, but it's not as unlikely as it was a month ago. And I think this could be mitigated by just a change in plan in, building that second exit sooner is all, before you start your development. I know it's different, and I know it's probably, in some ways, it might be more expensive. I don't know. I know, I trust developers to figure things out, because, but I guess for me, the people that are living in those first 300, 600, however many 100 units, I'd like them to be living when they get out of there. And that's just where my mind is right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Warden. Councillor Tingley.
Through the chair, after listening to everybody and listening to Deputy Warden Peary, I think I have to agree with what he says. I'm concerned about the safety factor, but I'd like to see maybe a report come back from staff before we put this into, go ahead with this motion type of thing. So I don't think I can support the motion either.
Thank you. We have a motion on the floor. A question's been called. We'll go to the vote. Staff, could you read the motion, please?
Move that we discontinue allowing more than 100 units before requiring a second entrance exit when negotiating development agreements.
Everybody understand the motion? We'll go to the vote. And the motion is passed 9-4 with myself, Counselor Hebb, Counselor Perry, and Counselor Tingley voting nay. Is there a recommendation or motion from the report? Ward Rolston.
Just a clarification through you, Mr. Chair. As this was in the hopper and presented to us prior to the passing of the previous motion, does this require an amendment to make the same negotiation or regulation apply to this one?
Director?
Through you, Mr. Chair. No, this is a little bit different. I mean, we're still negotiating with the developer. So I have no issue taking the direction from this motion and applying it to this application.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have a motion in front. What is your wish? Counselor Hebb.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move the Planning Advisory Committee recommends the council give first reading to an application from FM Development Group Incorporated to amend the MPS and LUB by changing the land use designation and zone of PID 45089-802 to Walkable Comprehensive Development District, WCDD, and give initial consideration to entering into a development agreement to permit a mixed-use master plan development.
Seconded by Counselor Tingley. Questions being called, we'll go to the vote. And the votes pass unanimously. Thank you, Debbie. Next item on the agenda is bylaw P1300, blasting bylaw. First reading, Rachel. Go ahead, Rachel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So at the meeting in January 2023, Council passed a motion that directed staff to bring back a report to introduce a blasting bylaw. Just a note to say this draft bylaw does not cover blasting in a quarry, as this is covered under the activities designation regulations. There are also blasting safety regulations, which are made under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, and these regulations would still be relevant to blasting, which is covered by the draft blasting bylaw. The draft blasting bylaw does not replicate the provincial regulations except for indicating that a blaster is required. So in April, staff presented a report and a draft blasting bylaw, and following that meeting, council directed staff to consult with the stakeholder community on that bylaw. So HRM has a blasting bylaw, and they've had that for several years, since 2003. They have engineering technologists on staff who administer that bylaw, and their role is identified as the inspector in the bylaw, and I've included a copy of that bylaw appended to the staff report today. So these staff have some experience with blasting, but they are not certified blasters at this time. There is an active role for the inspector in the administration of the bylaw. In 2022, just a statistic there, the HRM issued 52 blasting permits. So this is a summary of what's included in the HRM blasting bylaw. I'm not going to read them through, the details through, but it is included in the staff report. Planning staff have drafted a blasting bylaw using the HRM one as a template. However, the difference is that East Hants don't have the same resources to administer or enforce the bylaw as HRM does. As they have noted, they have inspectors who have knowledge and some experience of blasting, and these inspectors actively administer the bylaw. So an example is that in HRM, an inspector can allow for an increase in the area where a pre-blast survey is required, or can identify where a public meeting is required. So they would base that on their knowledge of the blasting. There is also a section regarding security deposit being required in some circumstances. So this allows HRM to, if they have grounds to believe that the blast monitoring and reporting are not meeting the standards, the municipality can then go in and use that security deposit to perform that monitoring. These decisions by the inspector would be informed by their knowledge and experience of blasting. So we don't have that same knowledge base here in East Hants. So based on that, planning staff have drafted a bylaw with the intent that the applicant and the qualified monitor are required to confirm their adherence to the bylaw. And the following sections have been included in the draft blasting bylaw. So a blasting permit's required. There'll be hours of blasting, which mirrors the community standards bylaw. Limits on noise and vibration. A pre-blast survey is carried out on identified nearby properties. A notice is delivered to property owners prior to the commencement of blasting. Blasting is under the care and control of a blaster. That's also a requirement under the regulations, the provincial regulations. Drilling, dust control, blast monitoring to be carried out by an independent person. Submission of records and administration section, rights and remedies. So the municipal solicitors helped identify some of those rights that should be included in the bylaw. In Appendix A, there is requirements for the monitoring and reporting of sound and vibration from the blasts. And then Appendix B is certificate of compliance for blast monitoring reports. So Appendix B really is the important one to know in that that's what the municipality will receive every week to show that the blaster is complying with the bylaw. So most of the responsibility for compliance with the draft bylaw is on the applicant, the blaster, and the qualified monitor. There will still be obligations on the municipality, but those are intended to ensure that the application is complete and contains all the required information, but most of the liability is put on others. And the municipal solicitor has commented that any certification made by a person held out to have expertise in the thing being certified, such as a qualified monitor, they can be relied upon by the municipality. And if that later turns out to be negligent, the municipality cannot be held liable. Staff, following the last meeting of Council and PAC, staff reached out to stakeholder community requesting comments on the draft bylaw. So those stakeholders included blaster or blasting companies, qualified monitors, and developers. Correspondence been received from one stakeholder. A copy of that response has been provided to PAC for information. However, a summary of their comments are also included in the staff report. So following the comments received from the stakeholder, an amendment has been made to the draft bylaw, and that amendment is that for blasting more than 2,000 meters distance from the building outside the blasting area, the blasting shall be exempt from the requirements of the blasting bylaw. So if you have a very rural area where there's more than 2,000 meters from where the blasting is occurring, then the blasting be exempt. The person that commented, the stakeholder, they suggested 300 meters. However, staff felt that was insufficient. So there are 3 alternatives identified. PAC and Council may decide not to support the adoption of the bylaw. PAC and Council may support a simpler bylaw with minimal requirements, and this will require less administration by municipal staff, but it could include hours of blasting, pre-blast survey, notice delivered to property owners, blasting under the care and control of a blaster, drilling, dust control, rights and remedies appropriate to a simpler bylaw. And then also number 3, following comments from the stakeholder, staff have included an exemption for where there's more than 2,000 meters to a building. PAC and Council may wish to make this distance larger, smaller, or remove this exemption altogether. So the recommendation is that Planning Advisory Committee recommend that Council give first reading to Bylaw P1300, blasting bylaw. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Rachel. What is your wish? Councilor Musa.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I read all the report. I'm happy with what's in it. And I know I'm the one who brought this up, and just because when you build a subdivision and you need to blast for the road, it's different than when you blast a mountain to build 100 miles of roads. So that's what's happening. Somebody is running a quarry without a permit, without anything, and doing his stuff on his own. So that should be stopped, and I think we can stop them. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Warden Perry.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to staff. In instances very much referenced, as like Councillor Musa said, if a development was blasting for their own aggregate on site, would they fall underneath this bylaw?
Through
It's
Mr.
not a
Chair.
registered quarry. It's just they're blasting on site for aggregate.
Yes, that, through you, Mr. Chair, that this would be, this bylaw would be relevant to that.
And all of the active sites that are currently doing this, or would it only be sites that are doing this moving forward? Or if there's areas that are currently blasting for aggregate for their own expansion of developments or their current development, would this bylaw affect them?
Yes, it would. It's not the same as a land use bylaw where you're moving forward from that date forward. If there is operations currently in existence, then they would still need to comply with the bylaw.
Okay, no, I want to commend staff, as Councilor Musa said. I read through the whole bylaw. I think it's a good way to have balance. I think there's enough flexibility in the bylaw that this should not impede up timelines. I don't think it should eat up a lot of staff time, but I think it will be a good way of protecting those that live within the distance as recommended by staff. So for that reason, I'm going to move the recommended motion.
Second.
It's moved in second. Any additional comments? Questions being called, we'll go to the vote. And the motion is passed unanimously. Thank you, Rachel. Last item on the agenda for Public Planning Advisory is Public Information Meeting Policy.
Do you need anything down here?
Nathan helped develop the bylaws, so we'll
No hurry.
bring him down just in case. All right.
Go ahead, John.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So following a public information meeting in March 2023, which generated significant public interest, Council directed staff to prepare a public information meeting policy. The policy is intended to provide greater clarity for councillors, public members of PAC, staff, applicants, and the general public regarding the role of each and expected behavior at PIMS, as I know that was an issue at that March meeting. So the way the policy defines the roles, so for PAC members, which would obviously include councillors, the policy says that they're not required to attend PIMS. Should they attend, the primary role of members of PAC at a PIM is to observe the proceedings. Members of PAC may only ask or answer questions for the purpose of clarification. So I don't think councillors should attend these things and feel like they're so handcuffed that they can't ask, when do you think the public hearing would be, or how many dwelling units is it? You know, those kind of clarification things I think are perfectly fine. But members of PAC may not indicate any bias concerning a proposal at a PIM. I think that's really where you get into trouble when you start to debate or offer opinions. For municipal staff, the role of municipal staff is to facilitate the PIM and present information to the public. Whenever possible, 3 staff members will attend a PIM. So, and again, the 3 roles are to chair the meeting, present the information, and to take notes. Now, we've cheated a little bit in cases where, I'm there and then 2 planners are there. We don't bother bringing a note taker. They can take notes for each other, that sort of thing. But generally, we'll fill those 3 roles. For the applicant, applicants will be permitted to present their proposed development at the PIM and answer any questions directed to them from the chair. Applicants may only present information at a PIM that has been previously made available to municipal council. I know that was a sore point for some councilors in the past where they were seeing things for the first time at a PIM. Application details that are presented must be in keeping with the proposal presented to PAC. So again, whatever staff present in our initial report, there really shouldn't be anything different in the PIM. Any presentation made by applicants must be submitted to the Planning and Development Department at least 1 week prior to the PIM, and then we will also post it for council's information. And members of the public may ask questions directed to the chair, and the chair will direct those obviously to other staff or the applicant as deemed appropriate. And then a couple other things covered by the policy. It would formalize the current practice of holding PIMs for the corridor area Enfield through Shubenacadie here at the Lady Matheson Center. Other PIMs would be held in a venue closer to the application site. And policy also enables live streaming and recording meetings whenever possible, and that's not possible in our current environment, but I'm sure it will be at some future point. And council also may authorize a PIM to be held virtually. Again, not something that we do right now, but could be in the future. And then the policy also outlines expected conduct. It says all attendees of a PIM must communicate civilly and respectfully with all attendees of the PIM. Failure to communicate or behave appropriately may result in an attendee being asked to leave the PIM. And, you know, if people just become completely unruly, obviously we would have to shut the meeting down, but hopefully that letting people know up front that's the expectation, that would help. So in terms of alternatives, there's really either not doing this or, you know, adding or subtracting something that staff haven't thought of. So to conclude, we've developed a policy that defines the roles of council, public members of PAC staff, applicants, and members of the public. It directs PIMs to appropriate venues and also enables live streaming and recording. So the recommendation is that PAC recommend that council approve the public information meeting policy, and as with all policies, there are two motions, one that goes to the to your policy council meeting later this afternoon, and then one that would go to council next week. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, John. Councilor Rhino.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Under municipal staff 2.2, whenever possible, 3 municipal staff members will attend a PIM. The 3 roles of staff members are chair, presenter, and note taker. I'm a little concerned, who will be the chair? Does not designate a proper chair. I think, you know, for me, I think it should be the director, yourself, or whoever's in your stead should be there, because I do not think it's fair to ask staff who are lower in status than the director to chair a meeting.
Sure.
So, could you answer that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, and I do intend to typically chair these PIMs and have been since March. I guess we didn't put the title in there in the event I'm not available or something that, you know, someone else could come in and pinch it for a meeting, but it is the intention that I would chair the majority of the PIMs going forward.
But is there a plan then, if you are not available, to have a director chair that? Because like I said, I don't think it's fair to have staff chair those meetings, because with that meeting in March was a very contentious issue. And I do believe that if it had had, and I will, a chair that took control of that meeting, it may not have went as far as it did. So I guess, is there a plan, and if in case of your absence?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, we haven't decided whether it would be another planner or if it would be another director. That we haven't discussed that at this point.
Well, you heard Mike, you know,
Yeah.
I've made my concerns public, that it should be a person of, that in a director's position. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Warden Rolston.
Well, I'd like to congratulate staff. I think they did a bang-up job on this policy. I think it's clear. Everybody knows, you should very clearly be able to understand the roles. With regards to the concerns about which member of staff chairs the meeting, I'm content to leave that to staff. I'm sure the Director of Planning will make probably the final decision around that, and he will know how contentious it may or may not be, possibly. And I'm sure if any member of his staff said, I don't feel comfortable chairing this meeting, he wouldn't force them to chair it. I'm content to leave that to staff to figure that out. And it's been my experience that if you attend a fractious meeting attended by some fractious people, pretty hard for anybody to rein the meeting in at times, but everybody does the best they can do. So I think this certainly clarifies things, and as new counselors come on, I think in particular future councils and new counselors coming to positions, they can read this policy and they can understand, that a PIM is different than a public information meeting, and this is what a PIM is all about. And I'll just add that it's incumbent on all of us as counselors to remember that questions we ask are for clarification purposes only, and not put our staff member who's chairing the meeting in the position of having to correct us if we stray offline. So, and that's a responsibility that we have under this policy. So anyway, kudos. I think it's a good job, and I'm going to move the recommended motion.
So moved in second. Councilor Musa, you were on before the motion. So
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Great job, guys. I know I get in trouble, and I think from now on, for council, every new council, when you do the councilor remuneration, whatever it's called, that policy should be the first item on, because it's easy to get in trouble. And if we all knew what's going on, I for myself, I wouldn't be asking the question I did or did what I did. I have only one question. I don't know if it's in a bylaw or not. The question should be directed to the applicant through staff. Mm-hmm. And if somebody jump and start to answer a question, what's going to happen? Like, are you going to be stopping them or let them talk to each other? Like, I think it should be between the applicant and the public, not between public and public. That's where we get in trouble.
Right. Through you, Mr. Chair, I agree. Although, I mean, there are some times, when one or two people show up to a PIM and it's a very collegial, it feels a bit formal to, but yeah, generally we would direct questions to and through the chair, just as we do here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Deputy Warden Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to staff, good job in defining the roles of everybody, and this is a good breakdown for public information meeting. I also agree that identifying a chair, we had a couple public information meetings in Mount Uniacke, and the staff that came out to present those things was not the director, and they did a bang-up job. I think it was a great opportunity for development and some of those non-contentious type of things, and I think that should still be able to happen to allow the development of staff. One of the things I don't see in here, and it might not be part of this policy, but it might be something we need to look at. Very difficult to ask somebody to leave if they don't want to leave. I think for certain type of things where we identify ahead of time, we might need to look at some form of security or something like that, just to keep things a little civil. We've had instances in the last 6 years that I've been on council. Certain people seem to show up to every public information meeting with the sole intent purposes of just causing trouble. They're not there to listen. They're not there to ask questions. They're just there to cause trouble and disrupt the proceedings. And that's not fair to all of the residents who show up to hear and want to understand what's going on. Those individuals that do these type of things, the first time they bring up their concerns, it's heard. And it's fine for them to come and raise their concerns again, but in a disrespectful manner is not appropriate. And I don't think our staff should be subjected to that. And I know that, you know, we do everything we can to protect our staff, but I think there needs to be some consideration. And moving forward, there might need to be a budget item for some of these things to allow for temporary security at some of these events, just to ensure the safety of everybody there moving forward. Because at the end of the day, some of these public information meetings do hit people hard, and people can get upset. And when people are upset, sometimes they don't make very good decisions. So we have to make sure that everybody's safe and secure, and that's the people attending, our staff, and the developers who are there to answer the questions. But I'll just leave that as some direction or food to thought, possibly to bring back at a later date. But I think it's a good policy. Everything is laid out clear, and well done. And I would like to move.
It's already done.
Oh, it's already.
Thank you, Deputy Warden. What is your wish? We have a motion on the floor. Questions being called. We'll go to the vote. And the motion is passed unanimously. I want to thank staff for their efforts this afternoon and the public members who could make it. Enjoy your week.
Mr. Chair, was that just the first motion that's been passed? Or do we need a second motion? Yeah. Okay. So, sorry, Shirley, we don't? Okay. Shirley says we don't need a second motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Shirley. Thank you, staff. Thank you, public members. Motion to adjourn. All those in favor? We're scheduled for a break.
And we're 10-minute break in our.
Back at 3:48, and then we'll go back to Park Rec and Culture.
increase rates. Mr. Scott Forward, General Manager, and Alana, you'll be in on this one? Or-
Through you, Mr. Chair, Scott's going to present the actual rate increase, and then I can support from any sort of facility management agreement questions.
All right, Mr. Forward, you're up for the presentation, sir.
I'm good on green. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Warden, Council. Come in to present the background behind why the proposal was put forth to raise the rates. Within this presentation, we have identified a number of factors that I will go over. One of the key things to remember, rates have not gone up in our facility in the past 6 years. The background for the rate increase, when we went through our budget of 2022-23, our first full fiscal budget created after the purchase to sale agreement by the municipality. Fiscal year changed from the East Hampton Indian Association for September 1 through to August 31st, and now it is April 1 until March 31st, which lines up with the fiscal year of the municipality. It created a couple challenges in terms of projections and history and lining up how the months typically transpire for our business model. Also coming out of COVID, COVID certainly created some variables that we hadn't anticipated in the past in terms of projecting future numbers. What the business model was going to look like, what clients were going to come back in total numbers and registrations. So that usage was a little bit of a wild card for us. The significance with that budget change, we were forced to try to create a budget 10 months before our peak season comes into play. And where that becomes an issue is I typically don't get the request for the future season until just a month or two before that season starts. Typically, it's, I would say, 6 to 8 weeks is the timeline. So it's, although a lot of it is pretty regular in this particular situation because of COVID and the changes, it was a little bit more volatile than typical. COVID-19 certainly created the unknown, not the unknown, which inflation, which I'm sure everybody has seen the impact of the inflation of the last year and a half. Consumables, food, oil, propane, wages have all changed substantially in our operation. Rate increase and decreases were discussed by the Board of Directors based on market factors, but a motion was passed to hold the rates for the 22-23 season to see where things played out for our fiscal budget. The end result of the 2022-23 season, we saw a $114,000 deficit against our budget. I know that differs from a budget that you would be used to seeing through a municipal budget. We have never worked off a zero balanced budget. We have always, the surplus typically has gone in towards doing additional projects, capital projects for the following year. So that gets identified as we work through our year. In this case, we have the deficit, so those projects do not tend to get done if they are presented at that time. Some of the factors that come into the past fiscal year that impacted our budget. We had some damage from Hurricane Fiona to one of the flashings, the roof between two ice pads. We took the precautionary approach of taking down the dome, and during the hurricane or before the hurricane, that that typically had been a $2,500 process in past years, but with inflation, the prime example would be to rent the lift to aid in that process. Impact was $1,800 to $2,000. This past year was close to $8,000, so pretty much 4 times the cost. Bingo is something that year to year is a bit volatile in terms of when the jackpots are paid out. The model typically is you have to pay one. I guess the law is we pay out one bingo per 52-week period. It can happen at any time during that period, so we typically budget for 2 payouts annually per bingo. And actually, we had an extra bingo jackpot go and a lucky ball. This year, we may only have 1 or 3 go, so it is a risk in terms of the budget. But over the past, since I've been in a position, I generally tend to average out the traditional payouts over the course of those years to kind of find a balance when they're going to play out in terms of being paid. Our utility costs were up on the year about $20,000. That was strictly from oil and propane. That was a very hard thing to budget 10 months out and then as it proceeds through the year. One thing I will comment, our budget, it's not as fluid. We make changes to try to adapt to the budget, but it's not we don't change the actual numbers in the budget per month. So it's once it's set, it stays at the budget. We look to a way to address and keep it on track. One of the major challenges we had was wages and hiring staff. We have many seasonal staff, and the competition for hiring those staff for that fiscal year was more challenging than past. We made out, we had a very strong operational team this year, but certainly we had about a 6.5% increase in our staffing cost in our operational team. Played out to about $32,000 for the annual. And the total of those unexpected expenses were around $97,400. So factors that were budgeted revenue that we did not realize, we had a event that we partnered with the local Legion in Elmsdale for Jig the Joker. We were still in our 2021-22 budget year when that was drawn, and that was drawn early in January. The budget was created in December. So we went through January, February, March, not realizing for that last fiscal year, and then we had proceeds budgeted in that budget for 2022-23 that were for April and May. That amount totaled $49,200. So that was a revenue amount that we had budgeted that we knew immediately we were not going to realize. At that time, we made some adjustments to some expenditures that we were planning on making, as well as some costs we could control to try to mitigate that. So we had that back under control within about a month and a half after the middle of July timeframe. The impact of that revenue, obviously we didn't realize that revenue, the unbudgeted expenses, the total impact really amounts to about $146,600. Had those things not been in the mix, we could have realized a surplus with the above no misses. Obviously, every year our budget is trying to project the future, and for us, this was one where a combination of factors certainly highlighted here didn't help that cause. When we went into a budgeting process for the first current year, I presented a budget to our board in early December. We went through the process with our budget committee. Once we viewed the initial budget that I proposed, we come through with a surplus of about 37.5. The committee met again and had given me direction to look at an increase of about 3 to 5%, depending on the venues. When I proposed and went back and looked at that, those numbers, I come back with an additional revenue amount that brought a surplus to 75.8 for the year. Those increases, what was concerning for the budget committee was that labor rates remain high. The power increase will increase to 7% for this year. And there was also some consideration given to the Canada Emergency Business Account loan that need to be repaid. At this point, there's a little bit of volatility in the timeline there. It still sits at December 31st, 2023, but there is some dialogue about that date moving into the future by a year. But at this point, the committee thought that it was best that we needed a bigger buffer in our ability to manage that if it turned out that we do need to pay it. The rate recommendation resulted in the additional 37,000 revenue increase, which brought us to the 75,800 surplus.
Got it?
Which, yes, sir.
All right. Members of the executive, you've heard the presentations. Any question or comment? Warden Rolston. Just wait, I'll get you going here. I can't turn that. There it is. There.
Ha.
You on? Okay,
Yes.
good. Fine.
I don't have to holler. Yeah, just looking at the information here and what is intended to happen with the rate increase. I guess I have a question around your strategic plan and maybe what you have in mind to increase revenues for the facility. I mean, I know you rent the ice surface and that, but there must be something in the strategic plan to bring in other revenue to help support the building.
So, it's a great question. Oh, sorry. Press.
Yeah, you're on. Well, that red light's on, you're on, now you're off. There you go.
Okay, sorry. So I think that the question around strategic plan certainly is a good question, and it's certainly a gap that we have currently in our operation. We have addressed the strategic plan in a recent meeting in terms of trying to move forward with some more depth to that strategic plan. We have a what I would call a high-level outline of that strategic plan. Over the years, have tried to follow it as best as the meat that is involved in that plan. But certainly in conversation with Alana and our board, we have tried to start the process to update that strategic plan. In terms of the process to try and generate more opportunity, some of the things that, are new that we continue to do and diversify our clientele list would be, one example would be our dog shows that, was never an opportunity for our facility, and that currently, generates close to $50,000 in revenue, with not a lot of expense added to it. There are opportunities like that we look at, and certainly the renewal of Tide Fest, we had some of those opportunities lost during COVID, as hard to have gatherings, but that is something that certainly the board and I have recognized we need to identify some more opportunities there. one thing to add, one of the things that comes up frequently with those new opportunities is while they do increase activity at a facility, many of the things that we've experienced in the past with some new ventures is the net gain on those events. We do drive some revenue, but we drive just as much expense on a number of those opportunities. So looking at opportunities where fundraising is always a model that people tend to gravitate to because the costs typically stay down. But fundraising is it's a challenging environment now with the amount of people that are trying to lower costs for the organizations that they have. So it had been identified as a challenging long-term plan in terms of generating additional revenue. So some of those new ideas are things that we certainly need to move forward with. So.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. I think that's wise because you've got a A-class facility there. And
Right.
I'm pleased to hear that you're looking at the opportunities to try and find different revenue streams and that.
And I think it's so a little bit of history. In my role, I had always been, I guess, directed to we rent space as opposed to developing programming, doing things that are outside of maybe the normal thing. The dog show was a space rental thing, but it was a bit of abbreviation from what we typically have done in the past. But it is something that I think need to be highlighted for our board in terms of reference, and we need to look for other opportunities to try and generate more revenue through other types of things than just renting space. So that is certainly something that is high on our priority list.
If I include one more,
Sure.
Mr. Chair?
You have the chair.
It's not so much a question, half a question, half maybe a suggestion, and I notice, and all fundraisers like Jig the Joker and Bingo, we all understand that those come with risk because we don't know when or what the payout's
Correct.
going to be. But I just wonder, is there perhaps some thought when you're having these fundraisers to budget a certain amount of the revenue from each bingo or each night or whatever, or each event, and set it aside in a reserve for the payout of the prize, so that it doesn't that way impact your budget year to year, if you get where I'm coming from.
Right, yep.
Just might, be helpful. You could budget for that, and then you have a pot in the, it would just mitigate a bit of that risk.
Right. So the Jig the Joker one, certainly that would be something that in the partnership we had committed a certain amount of funding to start the jackpot. So that less of a risk in terms of what we were to commit expense-wise. The bingo, we do run the bingo in a sense that it runs off a separate account, and that account is only used when we are cash flow challenges, and we bring that into our regular operating account. So that money is set aside in terms of being able to pay out those bingos. We're not able to have that account fall below the possible outcome of the max jackpot. And so what I realize what you're suggesting, in some ways we have it kind of covered, but at the same time, it does create the risk to the operating budget if we don't realize those expected outcomes. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Anything further, Warden?
No, not at this time.
Next up, Councillor Sandergaard Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. So I'm just thinking about this, and obviously, a couple concerns. You don't want to be operating in the red, so looking at an increase would help you with that. But then the flip side of that is that an increase to, well, ultimately to, for example, say a big part of your income, which would be hockey registration. So that's always a concern, especially when folks are just trying to barely able to get their kids playing with the cost of it these days, and other groups as well that would see the results of this increase through their registrations. So that's concerning. Is this just a presentation, or are we expected to make a decision right here today? Or it's something we can discuss, or, pardon me?
It's a presentation, and in my mind, and I stand to correct it, that we can either defer for discussion, or we can approve, or, those are the two options right there, or reject it, So those are the three options of what we had.
I see. Okay, just wondering if we were pressed for a decision-making today. Thank you.
Next up, Councillor Walter Tingley.
Through the chair to Scott, just a couple of questions there. Just talking about the Sportsplex income prior to COVID, can you tell us what the gross income was like for, say, 3 years prior?
So I can go back a little bit. Yes, I can. 2016 through 2018, to 2015, 16, 2016, 17, 2017, 18, we had positive cash flow. We had positive years with surpluses.
But I'm just talking about income now. Just the income, what the income was.
Oh, the actual amount?
Not the expense and what the income was coming in.
I don't have those numbers with me.
I'm just wondering if it was going up or down.
So it was trending up, yes. Over those years, we were trending up. So we have a couple factors. The years that we had Newbridge Academy on site and utilizing the facility, we were at our peak revenue those years, and that would be 2013, 14, 15, and part of the 16 season.
But I'm talking about 3 years prior.
And then our revenue model dropped from there, but our overall, we were still operating in a black position. And then that first year was a soft year. The next year we did increase our revenue, and the next year we did increase our revenue. And then we had the dome collapse of 2018, 19 that really kind of took a bite out of that revenue increase.
Right. And what was the cost of that?
What was the cost of
To
the
the Sportsplex, the dome collapse?
the net cost of that was around $474,000.
Okay. And the dog show, did I hear that correctly? $50,000 you make off the dog show?
We have 4 a year now, so we're roughly hauling in about 48,000 and change.
And you're still continuing to have the dog shows? They're still booking now?
So
The dog shows are still booking now?
Yes. So I have 3 booked going forward already. Yeah.
Okay. That's really all the questions I had.
That's all, Councillor Tingley. Thank you. Councillor Norval Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question through to Scott. This past weekend, with the car show and the soccer combine, and I think a shower upstairs, did you come out ahead on that on the weekend?
On this,
Positive?
on the car show, no, we would have not. That event is one that, again, being a community event, we were a supporter of ours. That is an event that we would have donated the parking lot to their organization to run that event.
The soccer combine?
The soccer combine, no, that would definitely have been a positive event for our
You don't
facility.
have any figures on that?
If I gave an exact figure, we'd probably be looking at $3,500 to $4,000. And that's a new event for us as well.
Any more of those planned, for the combine?
Well,
Or that was just a one-off?
what happens with those is if we have a number of clients that I deal with on a regular basis that we're looking at opportunity to do something that highlight the athletes in our community and our communities, our area. And much of these things happen in other facilities across the country in terms of identifying potential university athletes and college athletes. So when we look to have a venue for those, I'm often reaching out to those organizations to try to bring those events to our facility. We do another major one in the end of November that, of course, it's our peak season and it runs for the whole weekend. That's much more valuable, lucrative for our facility, but it does overlap with peak season. So one of our challenges is having the opportunity to have time available to add additional business during our peak season, because our local clubs use up the majority of our time, Monday through Friday. The weekend is booked, so you need the right pocket to bring in another event. Some of the things that we do is we have done a number of overnight softball tournaments, because those are times when we typically can't rent from 11 o'clock at night until the morning. But we've done a few of those prior to COVID. We've done one since COVID. That'll be something that we'll look to try and do again. But it's hard to rent additional space when it's already rented. And that is one of our biggest roadblocks.
Last deals with carbon tax on July 1st. Is that going to affect you much in terms of heating and oil, et cetera, et cetera? Is there going to be a carbon tax issue?
So I think there is some unknown with that for us. I think it's certainly a conversation that now I think is tied to the municipality and the facility, and we certainly have identified it. Well, I've identified it in talking with my chair of our board, but I don't have enough information at this point to comment further.
Okay, I know it's going to affect a lot of people, so thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, I know, and obviously from a resident standpoint, it's a rebate, but from our standpoint, that may not be the case, so.
It's can you survive to the rebate, though? That's the question I keep asking.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right, Warden Olson.
Well, I'm just going to put the hard question out there that we keep hearing as staff and counselors and that. And the question that we get is, well, the facility always operated with a surplus before, and now you folks are paying the mortgage payment, and they don't have that bill to pay anymore. So why do they need to increase rates and that? Why is it all of a sudden in a deficit when you don't have that big bill to pay anymore? And that's what they ask us. So I'm asking you.
I you know what? I agree wholeheartedly in terms of, what that perception certainly looks like. I could only say that from my side, I feel like the changes in the marketplace in terms of those unexpected costs that have changed from the traditional pattern we've had in the past have exceeded where we really felt they were going to be. I guess the second thing was we're never really sure just how the clients were going to come back to our facility. That uncertainty was certainly there, but the costs certainly have risen to a point where, I realize that that's roughly $165,000 that we don't have annually that we had at one point. Some of our biggest challenges coming out from under those 3 years of real challenging time. One is the dome deflating, and we just get out of that and basically have a break-even year, and then we go right into COVID, in which we're losing close to $400,000, which our relationship with the municipality helped to save off a situation that would have been bad for our community for sure. We just haven't got back on that solid footing since the dome collapsed, really. And now, with things continuing to increase, I think the committees, the budget committee for the board had really felt that without having a rate increase in 6 years, with all the inflation challenges and cost things, it was the time to put it out there. And I know in discussions in the last budget from the year before, there was a lot of heavy conversation about raising the rates at that time, and warning, and we should have done it, and we wouldn't have been in this position this year. But it's a it's a volatile time, I think, for our operation in terms of getting past that, and we're still grinding in terms of getting to a point where we've got the cash flow to operate and chase some of those other opportunities, because when they become a risk, more of a risk in terms of a losing profit, that doesn't necessarily enhance what we're doing or get us to the end goal of being profitable.
Gordon?
I don't know if that answered the question.
I guess it's challenging to try and
Yeah.
explain to the public. And
It absolutely.
And I guess my only cautionary thing is, no rate increase in 6 years, and should the rate increase be approved, and hopefully that will, I don't think that's gonna solve the entire problem. I think there has to be more programming and more revenue streams and that developed, because I know the challenges the Sportsplex is facing are very real. But every family out there with children who take part in things at the Sportsplex are facing those same challenges and those same increases in events. So it's certainly a balancing act, to say the least.
Yeah, and I don't, the goal is never to raise rates. The ideal situation would be not to be in that scenario. I think some of the things that really impact our rate proposal versus what we see in other facilities is just how the blended rate becomes a factor for us compared to possible HRM facilities or other surrounding, right? Having a minor hockey rate versus an adult rate. Those types of levels of rate choices are very significantly impacted by the amount of the percentage of user group. So in our facility, a large percentage of our user group is minor hockey, where in some of the other facilities, it's a lower rate compared percentage-wise. So they have the ability to make up the difference of the blended with a rate, two different rates, where we need to have that blended rate in order to balance that budget. So when we've had conversations about looking at, a minor hockey or youth rate, it just becomes a more volatile outcome for our budget when we looked at that.
Thank you, Warden. Next up, Councillor Walter Tingley.
Through the chair to Scott again. Just to make sure I understand, when you said the dome, the cost was $474,000 to when it went down?
No, that was a loss for that season.
That was an insurance loss, or? That was an insurance loss, or?
There was insurance, there was some coverage, but the net loss on our operation that year was that.
Revenue loss from revenue.
So your total loss from the dome, because it was down, was $474,000?
No,
I'm trying to understand.
the loss for the fiscal year that year directly impacted because of the dome come down was 474. So it's not just, it was total operation, but the dome was the biggest factor in that loss.
Okay. And so what was the actual cost of the dome, just the dome itself?
I'd have to get you that number, Walter. I'm sorry,
Okay.
I was throwing out something there.
Okay. And just have a question around minor hockey. Is that trending up or trending down, or what's going on with minor hockey?
So what I'm aware of at this point is minor hockey numbers are relatively stagnant, but they're showing significant traction in their younger groups at the moment. So their IP novice groups, the kids that are U7, U9, that trend looks to be a positive trend, because typically as you start strong in those age group, they'll finish with a higher percentage of numbers as they go through the programming. There are a couple of things that really happened that impacted our hockey usage with minor hockey, and one of the biggest things was when female council branched off into their own division. We had a very strong female presence in our facility and our association, with a team pretty much at every level. And in some cases, there was I think there was one level, there were two teams. When that branched off and they started their own council, many of the top players at each of those teams ended up going into rep teams, and those rep teams don't practice out of our facility. They don't use our facility. And then the rest of the players that weren't able to secure spots on those teams, they weren't enough to form a female team any longer, and they were pushed back into the numbers of the boys hockey. Well, there was some loss in attrition there because the girls didn't want to play with the boys. There was a lot of girls that were comfortable in the girls scenario, but not necessarily keen enough to play with the boys. So there was loss there. So the impact, we lost approximately 14 hours of rentals a week just from that happening. Now, that may have benefited another facility somewhere else, but certainly it didn't for us, because they would have been players made up from 3 or 4 different associations and deciding on where the most central location for practices and events would be.
So excluding the COVID years, the minor hockey would have been fairly steady 3 years prior to that?
I don't recall the exact year of when the council come in, but the membership is, I think, and I don't get the numbers specifically given to me, but it's been somewhere between 360, I think, and 400 over the last number of years, and we've had it over 500 and trending higher prior to the COVID and the female council change.
And what about last year?
I think around 385 was what I was told. And not a firsthand number, it's more, most of my conversations are around how much ice time are they going to utilize as opposed to specific numbers.
Okay.
Is that all, Councilor Tingley?
It is, yep.
Thank you. Deputy Warden Perry.
Thank you.
Oh, this thing's.
There you go. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, Scott. Scott, welcome. Thank you for your presentation today. You mentioned some off-peak times, some down times where the programming is a little less. You guys have a plan for attraction during those periods of time? And is there currently a network or anything that you guys are looking to plug into with different recreational opportunities to publish and promote the use of the Sportsplex?
So if I go back to a comment I made earlier around prior to the conversations that have been had between the board and staff through the purchase sale agreement and the management agreement at this point, programming has come up, but it has not been a mandate put forth to me as a directive. It's been about the rental of space. So when I look at opportunities to do that, an example would be a number, I believe in 18, 19, I went ahead and programmed a summer program for the Sportsplex in which we had some pretty good success. We hired the staff, we trained the staff, we had the program running as a Sportsplex program. After that, it was decided that wasn't necessarily the mindset of what our board was looking to do as a directive. And I turned that program over to another organization in the community that was looking to enhance it and build it. So we still have summer programming going on. Some of the challenges are just what do they look like in terms of program during the off season. There is ball hockey going on right now. Some of it sponsored and help with the municipality, but that doesn't generate us any revenue. It's a cost to the facility in terms of power. It's minimal, but doesn't generate any revenue. I have also engaged another group from outside the community that is running a ball hockey program that does generate revenue for our program. So always, the pipelines are looking for those opportunities. As talking to my peers, we all face the same challenges. We have never been an event, and most community facilities are not event-based facilities. Truro is trying to become an event-based facility, but even in their situation, they're still coming up with the shortfall. But that's planned for through the municipality or their council. But most of the other facilities that I am in contact with are in the very same situation. The opportunities are just not there in terms of driving profitable revenue. We had started a process with a fight league that was doing mixed martial arts. We hosted 4 or 5 of those events during the off season in the past. COVID kind of shut that down. I'm engaging them again for those types of events. We've had boxing events, same thing, engaging those folks again to try and drive some of that, event or activity into a facility during the off season.
Yeah, I was asking, not really about the program, more about business attraction.
Oh.
Getting people to come in, like the dog shows come in, you mentioned now,
Right.
the MMA, the boxing, things like that, which can spur other events.
Correct.
Because every time you host an event, it opens your door to new people,
Right.
and then the facility gets some light. Oh, I didn't know they hosted events like that there.
Absolutely.
Things like that. So
And we have had that happen a couple of times where people, oh, geez, this is like the best kept secret. that type of
exactly,
thing.
and
Exactly.
and we need to get that secret out. I mean, it's not in my area, but it's definitely a facility that has benefits for the municipality, especially those in the corridor area, and the business attraction side, and trying to let that secret get out. Is there anything currently in your position or direction from the board that has a map way forward to increase that and enable you to go after those opportunities?
So I would say I'll answer the last part of this question first. Certainly have always enabled me to go after it. The challenge with going after it is we go into kind of our off season with a substantial reduced staff. We go from 28 down to 8 to 10, depending on if we have something that we need to staff with an extra staff or for coverage. So that creates some of our challenge because we don't necessarily have the ability to host those types of events with a limited staff. And having them in for one-offs is, a lot of our staff have other opportunities that they pursue just in the off-season, which makes them, an attractive seasonal employee for our operations as it stands. To get to that stage, I think that's part of that meat that we need to add to the strategic plan at this point. I think a lot of those things had really been in the hopper and were moving forward, and things just kind of, for lack of a better word, went stagnant or sideways during the challenge of the dome and the COVID years. So I did mention we have had a discussion around a strategic plan. Certainly Atlanta has shared with us one that we're going to try to incorporate into the one that we currently had and try to get that updated. But that would be definitely the path forward. I can't speak for the board, but they're generally receptive to things that I push forth.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
That's all, Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Warden. Warden Rolston.
Thank you. Yes, I understand it is a change. Like in the past, as you mentioned, you weren't mandated to do programming and that. But under the facilities management agreement now, 3.2 is specifically mandated to develop, deliver, and staff programming and services and so on. So that is a change. What I'm going to suggest is we've received quite a bit of information here today. I have heard a few questions around numbers that you don't have with you here today. So I think rather than us try and make a decision today, we would be prudent to have our staff look at your current budget through the lens of the information that you've brought today And I would ask if you could maybe, I know you don't have it with you today, but if you could send Alana maybe a copy of your, like, let's go back before COVID, before COVID
Right.
sent things sideways. If you could send staff a copy of your, say, 2018 budget and your 2018 actuals, and then I assume they have a copy of this year's budget, and they could compare those line by line too, which would help us understand the changes that have gone on since then, and plus this information. And then if you could get that to Alana within, say, the next week or so, then by the time we come to our next meeting here, they'll have had time to process that, and through the comments and questions and information provided today, then we can have a discussion in July. And
Okay, so I'm clear, a year-to-year analysis from, say,
just a copy of the 2018, you must have had a 2018 budget, and then the actuals at the end of the year to match against that budget. And then that would just give them that to compare to the budget for this year, to see what all the changes are.
I can provide
since
those
then. Is that-
for sure. Yep.
Would that work, staff? Would that give you the numbers people have asked for today and whatnot? And Kim?
Are you done there, Warden?
Yeah.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the warden's question, I think it would be helpful, because we have looked at the numbers, I think we talked about this yesterday. It'd be helpful if it was 2018's budget and actual directly compared to this coming year's budget. So you track the line items for us, just so if there's different change in language between 2018 and now, you would know that where we wouldn't.
If you have a chart with budget 2018, actual 2018, and budget this year, in each line, and then the number in
Yep.
each one.
It's quite easy. Typically, when I present a budget to our board, I would present a summary that would compare to the previous years. The challenge has been, we've had a few volatile years that really, it's not an apples to apples scenario. So I think, yeah, for sure, that would be beneficial for you guys. I find it a struggle at times to look at it myself, because it's just a little bit of an abbreviation from what I experienced for the first several years, so.
Understood.
Well, Warden? At this time, seeing no one else, I'd like to ask a question or two, so I turn the chair over to yourself. With this 3% increase on rice rental and 4% field rentals, how are we comparatively to other facilities in and around us?
So I had sent a comparative based on my direct contact with the facilities that I reached out to. I believe Atlanta had also done some comparative, and at the time when I did it, there could have been some things in play. But we set right around the median. There are the rates as high as for ice as I think $286, and there's rates as low as $195 for ice rates. Every facility is just a little bit different in that operating model. The comparable rates around our area, we set right in the mix with the rest of the facilities.
So comparatively speaking to the rec center in Truro and the Sackville down here, so we're in the ballpark. We're not way above them, or we're not way below them, are we?
I guess it really, again, there are some factors. There's that it's the 2-rate model, a 3-rate model, versus our blended model. So in those cases, there could be, there's a youth rate that is less than our rate, and there's an adult rate that is higher than our rate. But in terms of you look at a blended model, the number is within 3 or 4% of those numbers.
Okay, very good.
Thank you.
That's all I was wanting to question about. All right, hearing no one else left to speak, what is your wish? You can defer this for further discussion, you can approve it, or you can reject it. What is your wish? Warden Rolston.
I would move that Mr. Forward provide the 2018 information and the line by line with the current budget as discussed previously, and that staff do a review of that information and bring us a report next month, and then we can discuss it through the lens of our discussion today and that information, and be in a hopefully position to make a decision.
Do we have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Green. Any comment or question around the motion? Question. Seeing no one wants to speak and the question being called, we'll go to the vote. Are we missing something?
Somebody hasn't
Somebody
voted.
hasn't. Oh, just have the record show, Councillor Tingley was not, no, you can't do that. Councillor Tingley was not present for the vote. So it has passed unanimously, so you will provide the information to staff, and then we will do our report and make a decision of some kind back in the next month. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And is there anything else for us?
No, we're going into council.
All right.
I was about to take it.
Oh, you had I didn't see you, Mr. Councillor McPhee. I'm very, very sorry.
It's a separate item from this. This is a new item.
Is it an agenda item?
No,
Was it approved on the agenda today?
not on the agenda.
Is it time sensitive?
It's time sensitive. It'll only take a moment. Just,
What's the wishes of council?
Yeah.
All right.
only thing I expected of less than 3 minutes.
I'm trying to get you on there, sir, but
I can talk with her.
I don't.
There we
you
go. Very good. Thank you for your consideration. It has to do with the community, the Shubenacadie River Park, and we finally have power as of yesterday, but we need plugs installed before haydays. So I'd like to make a motion that the Parks, Recreation, Culture Committee recommend to council that council support fitting the ball field with outlets to provide power for community events, installation of which to be paid for from the Shubenacadie Rec Fund Reserve.
We have moved by Councillor McPhee. It's a second by the Deputy Warden. Any comment or question around the motion that was created?
Question.
Seeing no comment or no one wanting to speak and the question being called, we will go to the vote. And the vote is in and is passed unanimously.
Less than 3 minutes.
You'll have to raise that in the council meeting to be passed by council.
Yeah.
So, yeah, to have it passed today, so it would go for, I won't be here. I'll be in that year. Anyway. So, seeing no other business left within our executive committee, we will now adjourn and fall into meeting of council for policy procedure. Am I correct? All right, so I need a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Mitchell, seconded by Councillor Green. All those in favor? Aye. Contrary mind? Motion's carried. Just play along.
Okay, councilors, we'll give time to get the system set up to move into council, and staff can let me know if we're good to move ahead. Good? Okay, folks.
So you've got two motions. Wayne has that public one from in camera before. And you can do that first if you want through corporate services.
Okay.
And
We'll call this meeting to order. First item, Corporate and Residential Services Committee report, Deputy Warden Perry. And we do have a motion from this morning that is coming forward as well. I believe that Counselor Green is going to make that motion coming out of the discussion we had this morning, but we do have a number of others on the report. So over to you, Deputy Warden.
Thank you, Madam Warden. The committee held its regular meeting on June 20th, 2023 in council chambers. The following motions are coming forward as a result of that meeting. Council remuneration and travel reimbursement policy. As a request to council, staff prepared an update to the council remuneration and travel reimbursement policy to align the meal allowances to the current amounts allowable by the Canadian Revenue Agency. The Corporate Residential Service Committee recommends to council the council give notice of intent to approve amendments to the council remuneration and travel reimbursement policy, section 5, to reflect meal allowances of $18 for breakfast, $21 for lunch, $30 for dinner, effective April 1st, 2023, as attached to the Executive Committee agenda, June 20th, 2023. As chair of the committee, I so move.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, the question's been called. And the motion has passed by a margin of 10-1, with Councillor Rhino voting nay. Back to you, Deputy Warden.
Special reserves policy. As council creates new reserves and depletes others, the appendix to the special reserve policy requires updates. As a result of those updates, an amendment to the policy is required. The Corporate Residential Service Committee recommends to council the council give notice of intent to approve the amendments to the special reserve policy as attached to the June 20th, 2023 Executive Committee agenda. As chair of the committee, I so move.
Seconded by Councillor Mitchell. Is there any discussion on the motion? Question's been called. And the motion is passed unanimously.
General Government Grants Policy. The General Government Grant Policy was reviewed as part of the Council's Policy Review Program. Amendments contain minor language changes, adds reference to the Municipal Strategic Plan, and simplifies the application deadline. The Corporate and Residential Service Committee recommends to Council the Council give notice of intent to approve the General Government Grant Policy amendments as attached to the Executive Committee agenda dated June 20th, 2023. As chair of the committee, I so move.
Seconded by Councillor Green. Is there any discussion on the motion? The question's been called. And the motion is passed unanimously.
Community Partnership Fund Policy. The Community Partnership Fund Policy was reviewed as part of the Council's Policy Review Program. Amendments contain significant cosmetic updates to align with current municipal policy standards and minor language changes. These changes preserve Council's intent for the fund while modernizing the policy. The Corporate Residential Services Committee recommends to Council the Council gives notice of intent to approve the Community Partnership Fund amendments as attached to the Executive Committee agenda dated 20th of June, 2023. As chair of the committee, I so move.
Seconded by Councillor Hebb. Is there any discussion on the motion? The question has been called. And the motion is passed unanimously.
As chair of the committee, I move the adoption of this report.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Contrary? Motion carried. I will now go to Councillor Green, who has a motion coming forward out of a discussion we held on the land issue earlier today.
Thank you, Warden. I would move that council rescind motion C22185 and cancel RFE 150574 expression of interest to purchase 821 Burncoat Road, PID number 45108-446, with any bids received under RFEI 150574 to remain unopened and be destroyed, and authorize the CAO to enter into an agreement of purchase and sale with the Burncoat Head Community Enhancement Society. I so move.
seconded by Counselor Mitchell. Is there any discussion on the motion?
Question.
Question's been called. And the motion is passed unanimously. So next on the agenda is the Planning Advisory Committee report. Over to you, Counselor Mitchell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The committee held its regular meeting on June 20, 2023 in council chambers. The following motions are coming forward as a result of that meeting. Public Information Meeting Policy. Following a public information meeting, PIM, in March 2023, council directed staff to prepare a public information meeting policy. The policy is intended to provide greater clarity for councilors, public members of PAC, staff, applicants, and the general public regarding the role of each and expected behavior at PIMS. The Planning Advisory Committee recommends to council that council give notice of intent to approve the public information meeting policy as attached to the Executive Committee agenda dated June 20th, 2023. As chair of the committee, I so move.
Seconded by Counselor Hibb. Is there any discussion on the motion?
Question.
Question has been called. And the motion is passed unanimously.
As chair of the committee, I move the adoption of this report.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Contrary, motion is carried. So we have one item left, which is, oh, yes, Counselor McPhee, you have a motion to bring forward, I believe, from Park Rec and Culture, kind of.
So, as approved or recommended by the Parks, Recreation, and Culture Committee, I'd like to move that we move forward with the installation of electrical plugs at the Shubenacadie River Park ball field. Oh, to be funded from Shubenacadie Recreation Funds.
Seconded by Counselor Mitchell. Is there any discussion on the motion?
Question?
Question's been called. And the motion is passed unanimously. Thank you. So we have one item left. It's an in-camera session around CAO priorities. So I would be looking for a motion to move in camera. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Aye. Contrary, motion carried. We'll give staff time to adjust the system for the in-camera recording. Okay, we're back. I would report that we met in camera to discuss a contractual issue. There are no motions coming forward at this time, so I would be looking for a motion to adjourn. So moved. Moved by Counselor Green, seconded by Counselor Musa. All those in favor? Aye. Contrary? Motion is carried. We are adjourned.